Now, we will have the session of Green Climate Fund under the theme of Realizing Green Innovation through Breakthrough Climate Action. We are pleased to have Mr. Javier Manzanares, the Deputy Executive Director of Green Climate Fund, to deliver a keynote speech. He is giving a speech titled Global Collaboration and Integrative Action for Green Innovation. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Javier Manzanares.
Good afternoon to everyone, good morning, good evening, depending upon your place of location. Greetings to everyone, colleagues and friends around the world. Let me start by congratulating SNU, by congratulating also the Ministry of Science and ICT for organizing this event. A 10th symposia on the green, smart development ambition. It is a privilege for the GCF to partner with the SNU, World Bank, KAIST, and many others to collaborating into this very important event. Today, as you know, day one is about green innovation. And my session is on realizing green innovation through breakthrough climate action, global collaboration, and integrative action for climate innovation. That's what the GCF is about. And I have chosen climate information and early warning systems as the main topic of this session. And I would like to share with you why. We're talking here about information, risk and climate information. We're also referring to innovation and technology delivered through efficient communication networks. We're also talking about technology when servicing, when delivering this information to communities. And finally, we're talking about getting the communities ready for these early warning systems. All in all, this makes a topic that goes precisely into climate action. It goes into the GCF's mandate. But even more importantly, it goes into adaptation. In the world of climate finance, when we talk about mitigation and adaptation, unfortunately, only 5 to 6% of the total climate financing goes to adaptation. And adaptation is to protect our communities, to protect the well-being of the people. And the GCF has a very relevant role to play in that regard. So I want you guys to get acquainted as much as possible with the climate information and early warning systems. And for that, today what I'll do is I'll go through a brief introduction and a global context. I will explain some barriers and opportunities as we see them at the Green Climate Fund. I will present to you developing impactful GCF projects. We'll give you an idea of what the GCF climate information and early warning system portfolio is like. And finally, we will go through some case studies. Per the global context, our emphasis is on climate impacts. And at the outset, the Green Climate Fund appreciates the opportunity to have joined WMO and others in preparing a very important report, the 2020 State of Climate Services. The extensive research conducted to complete the report also provides the GCF with important markers to continue its own growing funding for climate information and early warning systems in the over 100 developing countries nowadays receiving GCF support. As the world's largest dedicated provider of climate finance in developing countries, the GCF has been acting to fill the clear gaps identified in this report, especially targeting the most vulnerable. We are working to alleviate the situation where just 40% of countries providing data to WMO have multi-hazard early warning systems in place, only 40%. We note that the least developed countries and the small island developing states are particularly ill-equipped to deal with future climate change, while just 40,000 people in 100,000 people in Africa are covered by early warning systems. So, colleagues, early and effective early warning is the bedrock of climate adaptation, while the majority of the parties to the UNFCCC, including 88% from LDCs and SEEDs that submitted their NDCs, their national determined contributions, have identified early warning systems as a top priority. Thanks again to WMO, and as I indicated at the beginning, the GCF was a very proud contributor into this 2020 State of Climate Services. So I hope that has also served for us to have an introduction into the topic. But what is the relevance of climate information and early warning systems? In the past 50 years, storms, floods, tropical cyclones, and droughts have caused 3.7 million deaths. And also it has caused 7.6 billion people that have been affected. And who's being affected the most? Well, relative to the GDP, small island developing states and African countries have experienced the heaviest damages. And what is the trend like in terms of economic cost? Costs are definitely increasing from $50 billion reported back in 2007 to $70 to $100 billion recorded in 2010, and increasing to more than $280 billion reported in 2016. So, in sum, the economic cost of natural disaster has surpassed the $2.25 trillion in accumulated value from 1998 to year 2017. And when you look at the share by disaster type, you see that storms have caused approximately 46% of the economic losses, followed by earthquakes, followed by floods with 23%, and others. Climate information and early warning systems is about risk and climate information. It's about effective communications networks. It's about service delivery and preparedness and response plans. In terms of the Green Climate Fund interaction with countries, I would like to share with you some relevant data. All 13 parties which have submitted NAPs as a national adaptation plans as of June 20 mention climate information. Early warning systems are found in half of the national determined contributions submitted. The ambition that we see is clear, but we can also see that more concrete identification of action is lacking, even in countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Quality of the information provided is low, in most cases even superficial and incomplete. Our market studies at the GCF indicate that the lowest capacity is identified in sub-Saharan Africa. The growth of this sector is driven by a vibrant private sector, more specifically in energy, aviation, large-scale agriculture, and infrastructure resilience. According to our studies, the cost of establishing and operating a fit-for-purpose climate information and early warning systems remains way too expensive for non-annexed countries of the UNFCCC, that is to say, for developing countries. So, what are the multi-hazard early warning systems? Let me again use a video and a brief video clip with my acknowledgement and appreciation to WMO. So we have seen market assessments. We have seen a number of obstacles that are hampering the development of climate information and early warning systems at the scale. So which ones are those barriers to a full implementation of climate information and early warning systems in developing countries? So the first one is lack of enabling environment for institutional effectiveness. The second one is a lack of coverage and scale for effective service delivery of a hard infrastructure and inadequate soft infrastructure for ensuring delivery and uptake of information. Number three is uncoordinated interventions that limit the effectiveness of existing support to developing countries. Number four, limited governmental finance and budgets. Number five, true complexities of forecasting. Number six, market barriers to creating enable environments, enable conditions. Let's move now from barriers and obstacles to opportunities. So, again, ladies and gentlemen, we have gone through our market assessment, and we have identified some barriers, and also we believe that the following opportunities arise. Currently, growing demand far exceeds supply, and this is based on the INDCs, with 77% in Africa and the Middle East, 76% of Latin America and the Caribbean, and 100% of Asia and the Pacific. The climate information and early warning systems have market potential for unlocking private sector investments. We note a growing commitment across global, continental, and national scales. And I'm referring to the Paris Agreement. I'm also referring to the SDGs, the Sendai framework, and the global framework for climate services. There is an opportunity to enhance complementarity and coherence with other sources of funding and other sources of investments. There is plenty of room for leveraging private sector finance, for leveraging public budgets and public-private partnerships. So the GCF portfolio in climate information and early warning systems as of today presents the following characteristics. 74% of LDCs sits in African countries, with the remaining 26% going to projects in other developing countries. From the total investment in climate information and early warning systems, and you will see to the far right the total budget of approximately $1.8 billion GCF related. The GCF provides $877 million, and other partners provide additional sources for co-financing. In summary, and in terms of the GCF investments, what we can conclude with you is that the GCF has committed thus far to the climate information and early warning systems $877 million that with co-financing accumulates a total of $1.8 billion. The distribution of these investments varies across regions and countries grouping. Asia Pacific and Africa accounts for 85%, Latin America and the Caribbean 11%, and the Eastern Europe 4%. In terms of country groupings, 74% goes to least developed countries and small island developing states and African countries. International entities continue to dominate the arena. And what I mean by that is that when the GCF provides financing, it does channel the financing through entities that are accredited with the GCF. International entities at this point continue to dominate the channeling of the GCF financing into climate information and early warning systems. 25% of the projects have an emphasis on modernization of hydromet services, and 75% focus on sector applications. May I ask you now for your attention to the next video clip that goes into the heart of the GCF's mandate and to this excellent 10th Symposia of Green Smart Development and Vision, and especially on today's topic, on green innovation. And colleagues, I'm talking about providing developing countries with the necessary equipment, innovation, and technology to adapt to the catastrophic consequences of climate change. I am talking about accessing to climate information. I am talking about improving forecasting capabilities. But most importantly, I am talking about saving lives.
Komatsuka dango besa kuti mudzi wonse uli mbembembe madzi kazi bambo ena ndena amalayi tetenga amene matitenga amene tinalipo ndikumatipiritsa ku fisidi uko anapangako ulimi wothirira ndi anakumbadamu anakhangara kweza mudzimo ndeife pana makatisiya pati pamenepopo kuti tizikhala amenepo ndi pamene timakhala ife ana anga ena akuluakulu anazakwera mmwamba ndi anthu ena ndi ena mitengo yaikuluikulu ena azimayi ena adatikweza pamwamba pa visidiyo chifukwa ndife afupiafupi kusoko kunali kungothatha kuti nanga tipanga bwanji. Iyi ndi nyumba yanga yajinalili makhala pano ine koma yonse inatha ndi madzi ndipo zitavula zitatani singabwereso kumayi bora kungokhala mtunda omwe wakhala pachikwera tipumutsa miyoyo yathu pamodzi ndi miyoyo ya ana.
Ngozi zogwa madzidzidzi ndi zambiri. Timatha kunyamuka pa nyanja tisadadziwa kuti pabwera mphepo yanji. Timakumana ndi mphepo mwina mabwato ang'onoang'ono ngati asodzi amachera mbedza akhala kuti moyo. Kumira chifukwa choti nyengo imakhalira ita lakwika tili ku nyanja tisanadziwa tili kumtunda kuno.
Flooding is one of the biggest, hazards we have to deal with. And early warning information is then key in order to, one, reduce the numbers of people that may be affected, but also reduce the loss of lives. If people can be informed about an impending flood before it strikes, they can take, a number of actions that will reduce their vulnerability. So we have, through the Green Climate Fund project, invested a lot in equipment for the 2 technical departments that produce early warning information and climate information.
Next steps will still maybe have to work on almost the same issues, mainly the communication and dissemination of information, as well as the capacity to understand and interpret the information, especially for the rural masses, the farmers, the fishers.
Zimene zamayi zikhonza kutithandiza kwambiri kuona kuti tikhonza kukhala ndi information yabwino kuti panyanja sipali bwino tedi pangeze peti salowe zikhonza kutitetezesa kuti siononga ndalama zatukula mafuta kuti tikhonza kuti panyanja sipali bwino koma samiyo anthu tingamuonongeke.
Mapanalizida zingapo zimene timagwiritsa ntchito monga ngati resource allocation map kapena tikhoza kuti mapo apa khomo budget kodi angayipange bwanji komanso kodi akhoza kulosera bwanji nkhani ya zanyengo komanso weather forecast kuti kodi chaka chimenechi cha 2018-2019 season mvula iyenda motani kapena nyengo ikhala motani.
As we continue with implementation, as they improve, like in the analysis that they are doing, this project will greatly, contribute to reducing the numbers of people affected by disasters in the country.
The Green Climate Fund is about climate action. It's about climate financing. And with the 877 million only on climate information and early warning systems, I wanted you to have information on at least a few projects. Malawi was the first one. But please join me into 2 or 3 more case studies. Referring now to the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, with persistently frequent severe storms. By frequent, we're talking about an annual average of 19 severe storms. They also, in the Philippines, suffer from acute droughts. Economy and livelihoods are decimated annually by climate disasters, and more particularly from typhoons. This project will bring state-of-the-art, multi-hazard, impact-based forecasting and forecast-based financing to reduce disaster risk with 4 main outputs: and these are: the first one is generating a science-based multi-hazard weather and risk information. Output number 2, establishing a multi-hazard early warning information supported by strong knowledge management component. Output number 3 is about improving national and local capacities in implementing a people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems and forecast-based early actions. Output number 4 is mainstreaming climate risk information and multi-hazard early warning systems in development policy and planning, investment programming, and resilience planning at national and local levels, and institutionalizing a people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems in the Philippines. On the right-hand side, you will see a little bit more of information about this project. The GCF is a partnership organization, so that is to say that our interventions are always in partnership with other organizations. In this case, in the Philippines, our partner in the country is the Climate Change Commission. The accredited entity that is bringing in this funding proposal is Landsbank, and it will benefit directly at least 500,000 people and indirectly 8 million people. Let's move now to another case study. Different parts of the world. This is about Georgia. Complex mountainous terrain and climate makes Georgia prone to geological and hydrometeorological hazards, landslides, mud flows, erosion, avalanches, floods, droughts, and strong winds. INDC estimates climate-induced hazards for 2021 to be between $10 to $12 billion, while the cost of adaptation measure is estimated to be at $1.5 to $2 billion. This project will establish a robust impact-based multi-hazard and early warning systems to secure lives, to secure livelihoods and assets, with 3 main components. The first one is an expanded hydrometeorological observation network and modeling capacities that will secure reliable information on climate-induced hazards, vulnerability, and risk. Component number 2 is about the multi-hazard early warning system and new climate information. Component 3 is about an improved community resilience through the implementation of the multi-hazard early warning systems and priority risk reduction measures. So again, when we look at the project, you will see that our partner in the country is the National Designated Authority, the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources Protection of Georgia. In this case, our accredited entity in partnerships is UNDP, and we expect beneficiaries to round approximately directly beneficiaries to 1.7 million people and 2 million indirect beneficiaries. And let me finish today, colleagues, with a third case, a different part of the world. I'm talking about the case study on Niger Basin. The Niger Basin is a region with very complex climate signals, climate variability, climate change, extreme droughts, and famine. 7 out of the 9 countries are highly indebted. The cost of adaptation for those countries varies from 1 to 10% of the GDP. This project, ladies and gentlemen, will bring very significant social, economic, and environmental benefits, and will deliver on three main components. The first component is the development of ecosystems and natural resources resilience. The second component is about development of population resilience. And the third one about program coordination and management. And as before, the beneficiary countries in this occasion is the Niger Basin. That is to say, Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Ivory Coast, Guinea, Mali, Niger, and Nigeria. Our partner in those countries are the national designated authorities, and our created entity is the African Development Bank. Estimated beneficiaries as direct beneficiaries, it's about 4 million people, and 10 million people as indirect beneficiaries. The size of this project is about $210 million, from which the GCF is contributing with $67.8 million. I'm about to finish, colleagues, and I would like to have put at least some interest in you when we talk about adaptation and climate change. And very specifically, and as today being the day of green innovation, you have your eyes on climate information and early warning systems. And with this, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you for wonderful speech. Please give a big round of applause to Mr. Javier Manzanares. Next, there will be the panel discussion. I'd like to invite a chair of the panel discussion, Ms. Ania Maria Wanda Grobicki, the Deputy Director for Communications and Public Relations, Division of External Affairs of Green Climate Fund. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Ania Maria Wanda Grobicki.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much to the Seoul National University for hosting this wonderful conference. I've been enjoying the proceedings today very much, as I hope you all have. My name is Dr. Ania Grobicki, and I'm the Deputy Director for External Affairs at the GCF. In the past, I have worked as the Executive Secretary of the Global Water Partnership, which is a worldwide network, working with 86 developing countries on integrated water resources management. I've been the Deputy Secretary General and the Acting Secretary General for the Ramsar Convention of Wetlands of International Importance, and I have advised UN organizations such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Meteorological Organization, the UN Environment Programme, and others. Now, I joined GCF because I firmly believe that we have to solve the climate challenge in order to achieve the SDGs. And I'm fascinated by the interaction of the climate systems with the global water cycle. For GCF, investments in better climate science, as Javier was saying, that climate data are fundamental to structuring better climate projects and protecting people's lives and livelihoods. The decision-making about climate risks and really understanding adaptation impacts is protecting poor people and poor, vulnerable communities around the world. And together with reducing carbon emissions, it's a crucial part of GCF's mission. Now, today we have a very distinguished panel that's going to be discussing the rapid innovation that's taking place in delivering climate services. And I hope that you'll find this discussion as exciting as I do. Our first speaker today is going to be the Senior Climate Information and Early Warning Specialist of the Green Climate Fund, Dr. Joseph Insiful. And Joseph will be sharing with us the systems that and the strategies that GCF is developing in order to best direct the investment that GCF is making in this important sector. Joseph is currently managing over $1 billion portfolio in GCF adaptation projects, and he has over 20 years of experience in supporting developing countries to implement climate change in over 100 developing countries. So please join me in welcoming Joseph, who's going to give us the opening talk and set the scene for this panel on the rapid innovation in climate services. Thank you. Joseph, over to you. I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, can you allow me to share my screen? Can the host allow me to share my screen?
Okay, perhaps while Joseph is preparing his presentation, I could introduce the other distinguished members of our panel. We will also have on the panel today Markus Repnick, who's the Director of Partnerships at the World Meteorological Organization, with 30 years of experience gained with international organizations around the world, including the World Bank, also working with NGOs and the private sector. So many different kinds of partnerships. We have with us Dr. Andrea Bassi, who's the founder and CEO of Knowledge, which is a consultancy firm, and a senior associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Andrea has over 15 years of experience working with governments and international organizations on customized models for assessing the outcomes of policy and investment across social, economic, and environmental indicators. Andrea specializes in the use of system dynamics and its coupling with other modeling techniques. And he has worked in over 40 countries. Then we also have with us Dr. Marco Zennaro, who's a researcher at the Abdus Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy, where he coordinates the wireless group of the telecommunications laboratory. Marco's great research interest is in information and communications technologies for development, and in particular, he investigates the use of the Internet of Things in developing countries. He has given lectures on the Internet of Things in over 30 countries. So that's going to be a fascinating one. And then finally, I'm very pleased to introduce Ms. Bo-Ra Kim, who is a senior international project manager at the APEC Climate Center, which is located in Busan, where she develops and implements projects in various regions and countries in the Asia-Pacific region, spanning from Southeast Asia to the Pacific Islands. She recently received the Korean Meteorological Administration Commendation Award in recognition of her exceptional performance and contributions to international cooperation. So I'm very honored today to be chairing this most distinguished panel, and we really look forward to the discussions with you. Welcome to everyone. We will be starting off with a presentation from Joseph, which I see that he has managed to get on the screen.
Thanks very much, Anya, and distinguished panelists and guests. Apologies for the problem with allowing me to share my screen. I'm talking about GCF investment in climate information and early warning systems, and we'll begin in terms of outline of my presentation. I will look at introduction and context. I will also talk about opportunities and risk, and then the paradigm shift in terms of developing impactful GCF projects, and we'll conclude with a summary, and then also questions and answers will follow. And so if you permit me, I would like to introduce this by looking at the type of challenges that we are facing in terms of increasing climate extremes and related disasters. They are on the rise and about 5 times as frequent compared to the 1970s. But more importantly, if you look at the WMO state of the climate, global climate, particularly looking at 2017, you could see that the state of the global climate was very worried in terms of increasing the ocean content, sea level rise, and other parameters of the climate. And also in terms of climate risk, extreme events and related impacts, we could see very significant impacts that are happening. And so it means that the climate extreme is interacting with the socioeconomic conditions to lead to disasters that are increasing as fast as global warming is gathering pace. And also, if you look at the demand in terms of the demand from the INDCs that were presented to the Paris Agreement, we see that the countries are requesting for support in terms of managing this risk. If you look at the Africa and Middle East, we have 77% of the countries. Latin America and the Caribbean, we have 76%. And Asia Pacific is 100%. If you also look at the mandates that the board is giving to the GCF, you look at the board meeting the mandates on B704, the board asks for increased generation and use of climate information in decision making. And also B19, the board talks about the fact that an integrated approach to address the policy gaps, including steps to enhance climate rationale of GCF supported activities, is very critical. But then we also see opportunities, particularly you look at the role of government, because climate services, climate information, early warning systems are mostly of public goods nature. So we see a dual synergies for both government and GCF in terms of the government side to provide important services to society to improve the cost effectiveness while maximizing the performance of critical infrastructure that is needed to manage this risk. And GCF also can provide climate information early warning systems to several countries by creating a strong pipeline that looks about the mitigation and adaptation projects where climate information and early warning systems is mainstreamed into project design and implementation. But we also see risk, particularly what comes to mind is COVID-19. If we look at what is happening in terms of our observance systems globally and the forecasting system as a whole, we realize that the lack of observation over any particular area has the potential to impact on the quality of the forecast and the products that we need to manage climate variability and change. And so during this COVID, we have realized that aircraft observation that are critical for providing robust forecasting of early warning has reduced by 80% since early February, and is close to 90% in the tropics and then the southern hemisphere. And also availability of surface data that is critical for the global forecasting system has also reduced drastically, particularly in Africa. Also, ocean observations have declined by 80% compared to pre-COVID baselines. And so these are very, very critical issues that needs to be addressed if we really have to manage the impact of climate variability and change. But what constitutes a paradigm shift? What are the key elements that should constitute the climate information and early warning systems? There are 4 key components: the risk knowledge, which is to systematically collect data and undertake risk assessment, and also monitoring and warning services in order to develop hazardous monitoring and early warning services to manage and able to react to disasters, as well as dissemination and communication in terms of communicating the relevant information that enables community to act, and also response capability of governments and other agencies to build national and community response capability to manage those risks. And in terms of paradigm shift, we will look at 4 key critical areas: the transformational planning and programming, which is critical, which means the climate science should inform strategic planning, more particularly country programming, as well as implementation that aims at coherence and complementarity, efficiency and effectiveness. And also we look at catalyzing climate innovation using innovative technologies to underpin project design and implementation. And also mobilizing investment at scale, because we need partnership to leverage and scale up investment. An expansion and application of knowledge that will enable the mainstreaming of knowledge into institutions through collaboration and monitoring, and also impact evaluation. And so in summary, I will say that in terms of impact pathways, the climate information and early warning system has focused on 3 critical areas, which we will call the impact pathways. First, climate information services through modernization of hydromet services is critical for the creation of relevant science-based information that can inform decision-making and enable the efficiency of early warning systems, and also create new business opportunities. Impact-based forecasting, which is critical in terms of importance to de-risking investment by providing resilience and adaptive capacity and creating a new and more climate resilient path. And also investment, climate information, early warning system investment and financial decisions with a major focus on impact-based forecasting, forecast-based financing, and the critical elements that needs to come together to enable us to make this critical paradigm shift. To give you a bit of a perspective, today GCF has committed over $1.8 billion in supporting the establishment of climate information and early warning system and its application to development, part of meeting its mandates under the convention. In terms of distribution, we have 85% in Africa, 11% in Latin America, and then 4% in Eastern Europe. In terms of country groupings, we have 74% in Africa, LDCs and SIDS, which is critical in meeting the mandates of the Paris Agreement. And so we have also 26% of the project in other countries of non-Annex 1 parties. International accredited entities that access our funds occupy 91% of GCF resources. And it's also important to point out that 25% of the projects looks at modernizing hydromet services, while 75% focuses on applications to sectors. So the critical message here is that the demand for meeting the commitments under the Paris Agreement is defined by 25% meeting hydromet services, modernizing hydromet services, bringing the capacity that we need to be able to predict and build systems that better inform, while the 75% will look at supporting applications in aviation, agriculture, health, and other critical areas that are important for us to be able to meet the requirements of a low-emission, climate-resilient development. And thank you for your attention. Over.
Thank you very much indeed, Joseph, for describing to us this paradigm shift that's taking place in the design and implementation of climate information and early warning systems, and how this is actually informing the programming and investments taking place in this first strategy period of GCF. Now, without further ado, I'd like to move to Dr. Marcus Repnick, the Director of Development Partnerships from the World Meteorological Organization. Marcus, thank you for this great partnership that we have with you between GCF and WMO to work on climate science and climate rationale issues. And we look forward to sharing with us the frameworks and decision-making processes for improving the effectiveness of national, regional, and global policy making to drive investments in climate information and early warning systems. Thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Good morning. Greetings from Geneva. dear Anya, distinguished participants, colleagues. May I please ask the host to bring up the presentation that I prepared for this intervention? And while the presentation is being brought up, let me actually start off where Joseph left us, on the paradigm shift that is needed and the urgency, Anya, that you mentioned in your introductory remarks. Now, what brings us together today is about innovations in delivering climate services. Now, I want to focus my presentation on the most fundamental thing that we need for the provision of these climate services, namely the data. The foundational observation data and the missing foundational observation data from many developing countries. And I want to focus my presentation on what we have been developing in a partnership manner, including with our dear colleagues from the Green Climate Funds, namely the SOF, the Systematic Observations Financing Facility. So I wonder if the host could bring up the presentation, otherwise I will just continue without the slides.
I think the presentation is very nearly with us, Marcus. I can see it
and thank you very
screens.
much also to the host who is actually supporting us on this presentation. But again, the starting point is we talk about innovations on climate services. Climate services are built on what? Climate services are built on data, are built on foundational observation data. Just a few days ago, together with many partners, including colleagues from the Green Climate Fund, we launched the 2020 State of Climate Services report. A report developed with many partners, a report focusing on good practice examples, and a report coming out with 6 basic recommendations. One of the recommendations is that we need to have sustained financing model for foundational data, for basic observational data. And this brings me again now to the SOF, the Systematic Observations Financing Facility. So we can already move, go on, please. I think the slide number 4 or 5 already. Yes, the next slide, please. So let's stop, go back, please. So the SOF, what is it? It's about providing support to developing countries, providing this support in new ways, the link to the innovation topic of this session, and providing this support with a commitment of the major development and climate finance partners. Support, Joseph, you emphasized the increase of extreme events and climate risks over the last 2 to 3 decades. Over the last 2 to 3 decades, our computing capacity and actually the model resolution increased by a factor of at least 1,000. What has not increased over the last 2 to 3 decades is the provision of basic observational data. Actually, today, there's not more data international exchange than 25 years ago, and we have massive data gaps coming from or in developing countries, and this even before the COVID crisis. And Joseph, you demonstrated actually the rapid decline of available data in the context of COVID. One example, Africa, over the last 5 years, January 2015 to January 2020, a decline of 50% of radio observation data, so weather balloon data, the most foundational element of service-based observation. So on the one hand, increased extreme weather events, increased risks, on substantial improvements on computing capacity and model resolution. On the other hand, at best stagnant, in many places, decline of basic observational data. So there is a need, an urgent need to provide support to developing countries to generate and exchange this data. To do this in a new ways, and here we have a huge opportunity. The GBON, the Global Basic Observing Network, The international community last year established for the first time the GBON concept, an international agreement what constitutes the basic observational data needed for better climate services. And there's a commitment, not only from WMO, but of about 30 international development climate finance partners to move ahead in finding an innovative way of supporting countries in generating substantially more and better basic observational data, the foundation for climate services. Can you please move to the next slide? Because the next slide shows the members of the Alliance for Hydromet Development that we launched at the COP in Madrid in December last year, that brings together major development climate finance partners behind a common agenda. One of the commitments is to jointly create the systematic observations financing facility to fix perennial problem concerning the provision of basic observational data from developing. Next slide, please. Now, what do we want to achieve with the SOF? The goals and the outcomes. The goal is very clear. We want to strengthen climate adaptation and resilience through improved weather forecasts and climate services. And the SOF will focus on two outcomes, namely sustained long-term compliance with the Global Basic Observing Network. And second, increased access of developing countries to the improved weather forecast and climate analysis products developed with this data. Next slide, please. So we're talking about innovations in delivering climate services. What are the three innovative features of the SOF? First, SOF support will be provided based on internationally agreed metrics, the Global Basic Observing Network. How many observation stations are needed in each country to ensure that the minimum data, the observation data, the surface-based observation data are available. Second, using data exchange as a measure of success, moving from an inputs focus to a results focus. An inputs focus focusing on building up and fixing observation infrastructure, to actually this observation infrastructure delivering data into the global network, creating, last point, a global public good. Next slide, please. How do we plan to implement the SOF? The SOF support is going to be provided in 3 steps: readiness, investment, compliance. In the readiness phase, there's going to be an assessment about the national hydromet status, including, by the way, on climate services, and defining the GBON gap, the Global Basic Observing Network gap in this country, and developing a plan to close the gap. The second phase, investment phase, closing the investment gap in terms of hardware and software, including institutional and human capacity in the countries. And third, very important, the compliance phase, ensuring long-term delivery of this data into the global system, including through results-based finance. Now, where are we on our SOF journey that started about a year ago? We have actually developed, in collaboration with, as I mentioned, 30 international development and climate finance partners, including 3 partners who are actually partners of this conference, with the Climate Fund, the World Bank, and UNEP. We have developed the SOF concept and the basic design. We have mobilized quite some support, and we actually want to announce the SOF, the creation of the SOF at COP26 in Glasgow, to start with a first implementation phase of 5 years, focusing exclusively on 68 countries, the small island development states and the LDCs, and to bring them to GBON compliance in 5 years. This will result in at least 10 times more data shared from uprayer stations and at least 20 times more data shared from surface stations. For this initial 5-year phase, we need $400 million, which is less than invested today by the members of the Alliance for Hydromet Development on basic observation. So the value proposition is we need less money than currently invested, but we need to provide the resources and the support in an innovative way through the SOF the Systematic Observations Financing Facility. I would like to close with the welcoming remarks from Professor Yun-Seok Kwang, who called on us to take collective responsibility to shape the future that we all want for us. And it's the collective responsibility to fix the most fundamental problem, the perennial most fundamental problem concerning the provision of climate services, namely basic observational data coming missing today largely from developing countries. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much indeed, Marcus. And I'd like to follow up quickly with a question related to what you mentioned with this worrying decline of data in the context of COVID, that the climate data that's being delivered is really much, much less the observation stations, and the data is just not being gathered in many, many places due to the COVID pandemic. And linked to that, there's a question from the audience, which is, how are we doing in terms of sharing data across nations and regions in climate information? Perhaps also linked to COVID, there's been some problems in terms of the data sharing mechanisms which were set up previously. Could you just quickly outline for us what's been happening over the last 8 months in terms of data gathering during the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. And Anya, as you rightly mentioned, there are two elements. One is the generation of data, and the other one is the international sharing of data. In order to produce a weather forecast that goes beyond a 3 to 4 day range, there's a need to have weather data collected from all over the globe. If data are missing in one part of the world, it affects weather forecasts, including early warnings all over the globe. Now, concerning the generation of data, we saw a decline even before COVID. But as Joseph emphasized in his presentation, a rapid decline during COVID. So less data generated and less data internationally exchanged. So there are two problems that we need to fix: the generation of data, which is all the discussion about the investment gap, and the sharing of data, which actually is acknowledging the global public good value of data coming from those countries that don't have the economic means as the richer countries. But the baseline message is that even before COVID, example Africa, a 50% decline over 5 years of radio sound data internationally exchanged, now further aggravated in the context of the COVID crisis.
Thank you. And just a quick follow-up question to that. If you had a crystal ball, do you see that there could be some sort of V-shaped recovery with increased investment in these data and information systems? Or do you think it's going to be more of a K-shaped recovery where the developed countries continue to gather climate data in great detail, but the developing countries continue to be data scarce?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer, but I just know it is not sufficient that in the developing countries more data are collected. We have research and economic analysis that $1 invested in a developing country is worth $40 compared to an additional investment of observational data in Europe. So actually, even for European countries or the developed countries, it is economically wiser to invest in generation and sharing of observational data in developing countries than in their own countries, because we all are dependent on basic observational data from across the globe. And we've been taking things for granted, namely the provision of data, which is not for granted, and the COVID crisis has shown it.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And now we turn to Dr. Andrea Bassi. So, Andrea, we really look forward to hearing from you about the market opportunities and business models for data information and early warning systems. So, over to you. I see that your presentation is already up.
Yes, thank you, Anya. I'm very pleased to be here and giving this presentation. So first of all, I would like to start by introducing climate information services and early warning systems because they embody a variety of steps and types of infrastructure. We start with data gathering, as Marcus mentioned. We have to move on to cloud computing and processing to generate the information that is needed. And then we move on to dissemination and early warning systems for communities and businesses. Now, I mentioned this because when it comes to demand and to investments, climate information early warning systems provide a variety of entry points for investment, and we need to take that into account. It's a very, very diverse field. Now, when it comes to the global context, to set the stage for this analysis of demand and business models, as Joseph mentioned, we have an increasing amount of impacts over time, increasing in terms of value that is being lost because of climate impacts, giving us the rationale for investing more. But at the same time, we have a good confirmation that mortality is declining over time, showing that it does pay off from a social as well as economic point of view to invest in these areas. Now, when it comes to the demand, as opposed to what we have seen and observed historically, we have demand both from the policy side and from businesses. On the policy side, again, briefly, as Joseph mentioned, the vast majority of countries are including investments or actions in relation to climate information services and early warning systems in their national plans and in their NDCs. On the other hand, we start seeing gaps in this case. We start seeing gaps in terms of the understanding, the knowledge that countries have about what it takes to develop this information. On the business side, when it comes to proper market assessment, we see a great diversity of needs and infrastructure and capacities, most of which is focused on developed countries, again, business driven, when the resources are, more investment is taking place, and a lot less is found in developing countries. So I think the current state of things indicated. And apologies, I think I got disconnected for just a few seconds. I hope you haven't missed too much. Then, if we move on to the climate service market, if you look at different regions, now here we see
I think we're experiencing a bit of an internet interruption with a linkage with Andrea in Italy. So perhaps what I'd like to do is, in the meantime, we'll turn to some of the questions that we're receiving from the audience until Andrea is able to rejoin us. So linked to what Andrea was just presenting to us, we have a question from the audience. Is there a standard model or standard architecture that can be referenced to build up national level climate information early warning systems? And I think I'd like to turn this question over, first of all, to Joseph, and then perhaps to Marcus.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think this is a very good question. In terms of the what really one needs to take into account in building climate information early warning systems is basically what I outlined in terms of paradigm shifting. There are 4 critical elements that needs to be looked at in terms of the strategic programming elements, innovation in climate technologies that have been in terms of the Internet of Things computing infrastructure, and then some of the capabilities that comes through artificial intelligence and other IT services. And also you need to look at how you scale up in terms of investment, in terms of the sustainability of those investments, as well as the scaling up of those investments to cover other areas that cannot be covered in a single project. And also we look at the knowledge brokering element, which ensures that all these are put in a way that informs future programming. So there are 4 critical elements that we look in terms of developing impactful climate information early warning systems. And I can give you more information maybe later on. If you look at the presentations, we are developing a sector guide that articulates how a project needs to be developed. But more importantly, in terms of investment criteria, we have to look at the impact potential, the paradigm shift, the sustainable development potential. We also look at the country ownership of the design of the project. We look at the needs of the recipient. How does this solution address the needs of the recipient? And also efficiency and effectiveness that needs to be factored into the design and implementation of the project. So these are the 5 main criteria that we will look when investment are sent to GCF, as well as the paradigm shifting element that I highlighted. But I can give you more information once we finalize a sector guidance document that we are trying to put together to support project design. Over.
Yes, thank you, Joseph. And perhaps just to add that from the GCF point of view, we do invest in a number of multi-country projects for climate information and early warning systems. And of course, if there is a multi-country or regional project of this nature, then there would be a very similar architecture that we're investing in all of these countries, with the state-of-the-art systems and the rapid innovation that's going on. I'm just wondering whether Andrea has had a chance to rejoin us on audio.
Yes, I'm back, and I'm actually sharing my screen also. I hope that works and you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Apologies.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back. Please carry on.
Yes, so I'm not 100% sure of where the communication stopped, but I was going to highlight the climate service market, and I was mentioning that in terms of regions, we see the vast majority of the business happening in developed countries. You see North America, Europe, the Asia-Pacific region is where we have the vast majority of the activity. Far less in the rest of the world, meaning in Southeast, in Latin America, and then in the Middle East and Africa. Which again justifies the specific investments in setting up systems to deliver these services. Now, when it comes to sectors as well, the vast majority is focused on renewable energy, shipping, aviation, and this justifies in a way why during the period of COVID-19 we've had a massive reduction in the observations because business has slowed down extensively. There are a few of the other sectors that are emerging. We can look at insurance, we can look at utilities and retail, those businesses that happen at the local level, which are not profiting from the many benefits that climate information early warning systems can provide. So again, it's more of a global trend driven by large businesses. When it comes to the type of service provided, we see the medium range and the short range are dominating in this case. Now, the long range, which is what we need more for climate forecasts that have to do with climate adaptation, for instance, helping farmers on the ground and so on, it's lagging behind. Again, another important area for investment. But what is encouraging to see is that there is investment going, for instance, as we see in this case in terms of purpose, improving operational efficiency, but also improving safety for operations. So we see a rationale for economic as well as the social outcomes when investing in these areas. Now, the picture we're painting is not a perfect one, as many mentioned before. There are many barriers that we need to overcome to make so that climate information and early warning systems make use of the innovations that are taking place and therefore are being used more. Now, some of the barriers have to do with institutional effectiveness. There is a massive change in the sector where instead of investing on hardware, expensive hardware, we need to invest in online services. Now that drives a major change in the way the sector is being seen, especially at national level, where there are new skills that are required, different types of investments, and a much more user-oriented focus more than an infrastructure-oriented focus. Now, there is also the issue of the complexity of forecasting. As Marcus mentioned, we have improved extensively the way we are developing these data and models to forecast. But at the same time, if we move towards multi-hazard assessments, like Joseph mentioned, we increase the complexity even more, both for the developers and finally for the users. So financial structuring, so the new approach to financing can provide a solution to this, because as I said earlier, this is a very complex and diverse sector. So we need a way to support investments in climate information systems and early warning services where we are able to, in a way, meet the needs of different types of investors. So on the one hand, we need public budget, grants and loans to acquire the basic infrastructure needed, support knowledge creation, And while this has not worked well in the past, this transition to low-cost equipment and online services can provide these foundations for ongoing support and effective support in terms of public budget and external donors. Now, we then need to complement this investment with private sector investment, where we start thinking about how this data can be used to improve performance or to avoid damage. Now, in the first part, when we develop capacity and infrastructure, there is a relatively small return on investment, which is why many countries are not expanding investments in these areas. But when it comes to targeted support provided to businesses, that's where there is a higher value, a set of services being provided, but unfortunately not used to the full potential, because if we do a proper multi-hazard assessment, it requires that upfront investment with little return. So this is where we have the public budget coming in on one hand, the risking instruments, such as, for instance, bonds, green, resilience, environmental impact bonds, that can improve the approach being taken to deliver more user-driven services. Now, one potential trigger to change this dynamic and make it more sustainable is the introduction of forecast-based financing, mostly for risk finance. This is financing that is based on events, not on measured damage. So, for instance, the insurance sector could use models to forecast when an event would take place and what would be the size of the impact. Now, if the forecasted size is large enough, going beyond the threshold, then payments will be released. Now, instead of waiting for an impact to occur and refund the potential damage, this allows investors or interested investors to invest beforehand and generate, in fact, a return or a revenue out of just the event taking place. So in a way, this is providing a paradigm shift, because it allows to generate a return, a revenue stream in a way that otherwise is not available at the moment. At the moment, we're just investing to avoid the potential damage that may occur. But if there is this forecast-based financing, then we would be investing knowing that if climate change gets worse, then we receive more payments, even if we are more climate resilient. And so it justifies the investment in the first place and makes the whole sector more self-sustainable. Now, the underlying concept here is blended finance, which makes so that we can address the main barriers with high perceived risk, where the private sector would not invest, but also it would generate the returns that the private sector needs. So if you have a combination of private capital and development funding with a blended finance structure, then we can address most of the barriers that we have identified, and we can profit from the development of technologies which lowers the cost early on, but allows us to develop a more user-oriented approach. So this is the end of my presentation, and again, apologies for the problem with the connection of it.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was very clear. And thank you for outlining this exciting revolution that's happening in terms of the transition to online data gathering, to the low-cost equipment that's coming into the sector, and that this is causing a revolution not only on the equipment side, but also there's a revolution happening on the finance side. Which is very exciting indeed, and opening up many opportunities for the private sector. So now with that, I'd like to transition to linking with Marco Zanaro, who's also in Italy. And Marco, we'd love to hear from you about the innovations in the Internet of Things, in the big data analytics that's happening in the sector, and that's really making the landscape change so quickly in terms of people's access to climate information and early warning systems. Marco, are you with us? Oh, perhaps we've lost him. Okay. While we're waiting for Marco to rejoin us, then I'd like to move to you, Bora. Thank you so much for joining us from Busan. And we'd love to hear from you in terms of how you see, with the regional experience and all your work in the Asia-Pacific region, how you see the improvements in institutional effectiveness and how you see the innovation revolution in climate data coming into the Asia-Pacific region.
Sure.
Over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Anya, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me and see my slides?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So as Anya introduced, my name is Bora Kim, and I'm a Senior International Project Manager at the APEC Climate Center, or APCC. I'm here today to talk about some of our climate information services that we provide globally and in the Asia Pacific region. My colleagues have talked about financing for climate services, but when we're talking about climate services, what exactly are we talking about? So in 2005, APCC was formally launched during the 13th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in Busan, Korea. And since then, APCC has been working towards its vision of strengthening scientific and technological cooperation from across the APEC region in order to help economies and societies deal effectively with the consequences of current and future climate-related hazards through the provision of climate information, research, and technical support. So for the past 15 years, APCC has been providing climate information products and services based on a multi-model ensemble prediction system, which I'll explain in a little bit. So in our day-to-day operations, we have generally 3 different realms: climate prediction, climate application, and capacity building. That's a lot of the different, the way that climate information is divided across the world, actually. So within the climate prediction realm, APCC produces value-added, reliable, and real-time climate prediction information for the APEC region. So some of these examples are 3- and 6-month forecasts, ENSO outlooks, S2S forecasts, and we also provide various online services for researchers and people who need data, such as Click, for seasonal prediction for their own region. That can be customized, clips for accessing standardized and processed big climate data, and our new Click service that is currently in its beta launch for downloading digitized climate data. So all of these services can be found online on our website, and all of APCC's climate information services are based on our climate prediction system using a multi-model ensemble technique. So for those that may be less familiar with what we define to be climate information consists of data and trends in temperature, rainfall, wind, humidity, and many other variables. So if you see here on this slide, you can see that climate prediction information can be separated into different time scales. So there's a weather forecast that span the range of 1 to 10 days. There's S2S, or sub-seasonal to seasonal forecasts, that range from 10 to 30 days. And then there are seasonal outlooks that range from 30 days up to 6 months. And of course, you all know that there's also climate change projections that can span up to hundreds of years in the future. APCC, we focus on S2S and seasonal outlooks, so from 10 to 30 days and 3 months to 6 months. So why is climate information important in different timescales, and how can this information help us? This shows some of the actions that we can take based on climate information. So with seasonal forecasts, for example, we can start preparing for potential risk way in advance. So for example, if it's predicted that within the next 3 months, a drought may come, then the Met Service in your country can be on alert regarding potential drought in the region. With S2S forecasts, so 10 to 30 days, we can get shorter term information that can lead to actual real actions. So for example, if the Met Service really sees a high potential of drought for the next 30 days, it can issue an alert allowing farmers to start irrigating their crops, which can lead to less risk of crop failure. Or if they see that there's going to be an abnormal amount of rainfall or a high probability of typhoons or tropical cyclones, they can be on alert and begin preparing humanitarian aid, like Andrea was talking about with forecast-based financing, so that it can be ready to go within days in the case of an emergency. So for all of our climate information services, I mentioned before, APCC developed a climate prediction system based on a multi-model ensemble technique. The MME model is unique in that it gathers global climate forecast data from 14 different institutions from 10 different countries. And then with that data, we generate our climate information products. So this diagram shows the 14 institutes that we receive data from for the MME model. And so this includes organizations like NASA or Australia Bureau of Meteorology, et cetera, et cetera. And the data providers not only provide us data, but they also meet every 2 years and discuss how to improve their individual model systems, as well as APCC's overall MME technique. So with that MME technology, we produce climate information, climate prediction information, like some of these shown on this slide. So this is our ENSO forecast for the next 3 months, indicating a potential strong La Nina event, as well as the prediction and temperature 3-month forecast. And all of this information and more are publicly available on our website. So basically, APCC doesn't only generate this type of climate information, we can tailor that information utilizing downscaling methods for smaller countries or for higher resolution, or we can apply climate information to application sectors. So we have a lot of projects around the Asia Pacific region that help tailor climate information to the needs of target countries or regions. The ones listed up here are just a few examples of projects that we are either currently conducting or have already completed. These include projects focusing on developing climate prediction systems for developing countries, like the Rocky Eclipse project in the Pacific, or better managing agriculture and water sectors in the face of a changing climate, like our Tonga projects. So in the Pacific Islands, or STIDS, coarse resolution climate information is almost useless because it doesn't predict the variability of climate that occurs from one side of the island to another. So APCC was able to downscale climate predictions to station level forecasts for those islands. So Picasso, which is shown here on this slide, or the Pacific Islands Countries Advanced Seasonal Outlook, is an offline program that allows National Met Services to generate their own localized prediction and seasonal outlooks. And Picasso was launched in 2017 at the Pacific Islands Climate Outlook Forum. And Picasso is unique from other forecasting programs in the Pacific as it's providing hybrid, dynamical, and statistical downscaled climate information. And then an example of applications to water, APCC conducted a smart groundwater management project in Tonga where we installed real-time groundwater monitoring meters and developed the final Tonga groundwater information system. So this is also where kind of lack of data comes into play a lot. So in Tonga, they were manually measuring groundwater, and that wasn't necessarily the best when in the event of a flood or drought, they weren't able to constantly monitor groundwater levels, which can lead to saltwater intrusion and issues like that. So this system allows the government of Tonga to monitor groundwater levels in Tonga in real time, and not only monitor, but then they apply climate forecasts to the groundwater models, giving them the capabilities to better manage their water resources, as well as establish a mid to long-term strategic plan for responding to water shortages. And then an example for agriculture management. In Tonga, we also developed a web-based mobile device compatible decision support system to inform the agriculture sector of near real-time weather and climate data and utilize climate information for climate smart decision-making in the agriculture sector at the provincial or national levels. So with this system, farmers can kind of use climate information to see and project what their yield may be based on climate information. And also it provides decision-making tools for those farmers as well to decide if they should be irrigating, if they should be using fertilizer, what kind of pests may come up in the next 3 months or so. And this project was successful in Tonga and is now being replicated in Vanuatu as a part of the GCF-funded Climate Information Services for Resilient Development Planning in Vanuatu project. And so we've talked a lot about climate prediction, but actually looking back and taking climate data and with climate observation or historical data, we're able to evaluate risks and learn from previous events. So for example, in a partnership with UNDP and a few other organizations, APCC was able to provide scientific insight on the 2015-2016 abnormal El Nino event in the Asia Pacific region. So this graphic here is just an example of one of the analyses that we conducted using historical data from that period. This shows the impact of El Nino on regional precipitation in comparison with total internet annual variability. So looking at this report and reading this report can help decision decision makers really understand how El Nino may impact the precipitation levels in their country in the future, in different months. So I hope that with some of these examples of our climate information services, you can see the impacts, the real impacts that climate information can have in various sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bo-Ra. This was a really wonderful presentation, and it's very exciting to see both the ways in which you're able to downscale climate information, even to the smallest small island developing states, and also these incredible innovations in reaching out to stakeholders in the different sectors in water and agriculture, and really bringing to them the climate information that's most relevant for their decision making. Thank you so much for that. Now, as we come to the closing few minutes of this panel, I'd like to ask each one of the panelists to come back with just a 1-minute reflection on one of the questions from the audience, very broad-ranging question, I think you'll agree. What are the most critical areas of climate information and early warning systems that need to be implemented globally? So for each of you, I'd like you to think of the one most critical area that you'd like to emphasize now in the conclusion of our panel. So Bo-Ra, if I may start with you, which is the one area that at a global level you believe really needs to have more investment urgently?
Sure. So we've talked a lot about the innovations that have happened in the climate information realm. There's a lot of things like IoT and big data and machine learning that can be used, and we have wonderful climate models that are global now that are actually very high resolution. But what I've seen in many developing countries is a lack of capacity and awareness of these global models and these innovations. And so with that, I think increasing funds and increasing resources that go into capacity building for these small island developing states or less capacity national Met services is really important, as they're not actually able to utilize all of the information that is available to them. So that, I think, would be one of the main messages from a technical standpoint.
Thank you so much, Bo-Ra. And Andrea, over to you. What do you see as being the most critical area needing investment right now?
Well, if I'm thinking about the potential for realizing impact in the medium and longer term, I would like to see this type of data and information being presented to the public in a mainstream way, possibly in the news every day, indicating what is the forecast for climate in the next 3 months, because everyone is following the news. So in a way, I would like to see more effort in mainstreaming, in socializing this information in the future in just about every country. As we look at the weather forecast, we should look at the medium-term and longer-term forecast to have people be better prepared for what may be coming, given that we have these massive seasonal changes coming up and that we have already experienced. So a lot of investment can go into setting up the systems and delivering the information, but I think we need to complement that with mainstreaming that information to the general public, not only those that may be directly impacted, but just about everyone in the port.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So it's not just the day-to-day weather awareness that people need, but as the climate changes more and more rapidly, perhaps that climate awareness of the general public really needs to be built through the way in which the climate information is communicated. Thank you so much for that. Marcus, over to you. What do you see as the most urgent area needing investment right now globally in this whole area of climate information and early warning systems?
Anya, colleagues, I'm very predictable. 3 points. No climate services without data. We need to substantially increase availability of basic observational data from developing countries. We need to increase the amount of data by a factor of 10 to 20. And third, we don't need more money for this. We need a very different way of financing and supporting developing countries in generating and sharing this data, the systematic observations financing.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So what we're hearing from you is the need for the financial innovations to come in to be able to really make the investments in a smarter way. And Joseph, finally over to you for the last word.
Thanks very much, Anya. For me, if I look at the portfolio in terms of demand from countries, it shows 25% going into modernizing hydromet services and 75% in applications to development. And so it's very clear, the message is very clear, both in the submission of countries to the Paris Agreement in terms of the INDCs, and also what we are seeing in our portfolio. And so for me, the focus could be more on applications, the various sectors. We have to remember that a climate forecast has no value until it's used. So creating more new markets, looking at how we can optimize the use of climate information to reduce impacts on lives, livelihoods, and assets will be very, very critical. And so this is how I would look at it, looking at the demand side of the equation, and then invest more in ways that we could develop capabilities that will enable us to do some of the most innovative things through better applications to development. Thanks. Over.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I'm sorry that Marco Zanaro wasn't able to join our panel, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that this was really a most wonderful hour that we've spent together, exploring together with the panelists all the various aspects and innovations that are really changing the landscape of climate information and early warning systems, and that are going to give us a much better handle on being able to face the climate change challenge in the future. So please join me in giving a big hand to Bora Kim, to Andrea Bassi, to Marcus Repnik, and to Joseph Insiful. Thank you so much to all of you. And now it's my great pleasure to hand over the baton and the microphone to my colleague from the Green Climate Fund, Drazen Kuchan, who's the Senior Urban Specialist in the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation. And Drazen is going to be talking to us about green and smart cities as the first in the series of inspirational presentations. Thank you, Drazen.
Well done, Anya. Thank you very much. Kabishi, you want to join me, please? Okay, colleagues, good afternoon. Now we're going to spend the next 1 hour talking to technical team of the Green Climate Fund. Myself, I work as a Senior Urban Development and Energy Efficiency Specialist, Division Mitigation Adaptation. We'll be connecting to Sabine Basniat, who is a Senior Specialist for Energy Efficiency and Transport. And next to me sits Kabishi, who is our Regional Manager for Francophone Africa, right, Kabishi? Okay, you have a mic or you don't have a mic? No? Very good, yeah. Before I start with my presentation, I just want to comment from technical perspective. We're going to be talking a lot about the difference between green cities and smart cities. And the Korean president recently announced that the Korea will invest about 160 trillion won, of which 114.1 trillion won worth of fiscal investment to create 1.9 million jobs by 2025, based on two main policies, the Digital New Deal and the Green New Deal. And that's exactly what GCF stands for in terms of transformative and paradigm-shifting investment in public and private sector in developing countries. So we do look forward to connect lessons learned and stories and know-how from Korea via GCF to the developing countries. And we're going to be talking about several sectors. And we're also going to be talking through our colleague from the Division Country Programming about readiness program and what is GCF doing to make countries more ready to be able to adopt eventually a smarter paradigm shift vision, such as we have seen in Korea. So maybe we start with a presentation on green and smart cities that I'm going to develop. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Global Practices for Climate Impact and Financing of Green and Smart Cities. If I can have a next slide, please. We are going to have four focus areas. One, we are going to be talking about the climate change realities in the context of cities, urban areas, and urban development complexities. We are going to be talking now, yes, thank you. We are going to be talking about taxonomy of green versus smart cities and how it defines climate-driven interventions for cities and urban areas. We're going to be touching upon the theory of change and maximizing climate impact in cities and urban areas, and what are the GCF sector-driven interventions towards paradigm shifting and green transformation forward thinking. Next slide. Next slide, please. So if you look into the climate change realities, the United Nations stipulated in 2015 that we will all try to keep the global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The first calculations of this carried in 1979 under the direction of the American meteorologists actually showed a warning between 1.5 and 4.5 degrees Celsius. So how many degrees will global temperature increase over time depends on how quickly we can reduce the CO2 concentration, and we need to reach net zero emissions. But you will see in the course of presentation that actually the scenarios vary and that we are still pretty much in a danger zone. Next slide. So this is just an impression of what is the annual total CO2 emission by the world region, and you can see that we are reaching over 35 billion ton of CO2 equivalent. Next slide. So why cities and why urban? We are talking about cities because cities are generally responsible in urban areas for about 80% of total GHG emission. There is a very close interaction between urban forms, service access, and per capita GHG emissions. As you can see, emissions from the cities, Rotterdam is very high with 28.9 tons CO2 equivalent per person, Sydney 15, Shanghai 12, Amman 3.4, Colombo 1.54. But the cities really are critical factor in fighting the climate change. Secondly, the International Energy estimates that while currently 71% of total GHG emissions exist, 76% of energy-related GHG by 2030 will come from cities. And then we therefore define not only scope 1, but also scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, which are then production or consumption-based emissions. And finally, how important are the urban economies? We're going to try to explain. Both Tokyo and New York already have a greater GDP than Canada. By 2030, New Delhi will have a greater GDP than Malaysia. That's how critical. So we are depending on these economic systems, but unless we decarbonize them and decouple economic growth from carbon emissions, we will have no future on this earth. So we're going to be focusing on urban form interventions and integrated transportation system, as well as the greater material, products, and activities efficiency, which we'll tackle in this presentation. Next slide. So broadly, all of the existing reporting in the context of the IPCC and previously known data are saying two things: that we either look into the lower than 1.5 degrees scenario warming or lower than 2 degrees scenario warming. One is suggesting that we have about 750 gigaton of CO2 budget equivalent until 2030. And the 2 degree scenario says that available carbon budget is about 1,050 gigatons equivalent of CO2 by 2030. So one is a little bit less flexible, the other one is a little bit more flexible. The entire Paris Agreement is based on the 2 degree scenarios. Only existing current urbanization trend, the CO2 footprint of construction of new infrastructures in developing countries and emerging economies, could lead to as much as 350 gigatons of CO2 emissions. In other words, if we do not tackle urban challenges, about a third of the emissions we need to reduce will come from the urban areas and cities. So that's how critical our fight is. Next slide. However, there are also new data these days. New data is suggesting that at the current rate at which humans emit CO2, the doubling of the warming can be achieved within 50 to 60 years, and this is the new comprehensive analysis that has been recently published in Review of Geophysics, suggesting that we are actually moving not between 1.5 and 2 degree scenarios, but we are actually moving towards 2.6 to 4.1 degree scenarios. So the researchers actually have provided an important refinement of climate sensitivities, and suggesting that unless we drastically reduce CO2 emissions, the total stability of the system will start to decline, and we will start having a much serious climate impact scenarios playing around ourselves. So that's how serious the thing is. So next slide, please. And then we go back to the cities and we say that the blueprint for the urban climate change realities and transformational income was developed by the UNFCCC technical paper, which suggests that through strong mitigation action aimed at low carbon climate resilient development at the local level, in key sectors such as building, transportation, and waste, cities could reduce the GHG emissions in these core sectors by 24% by 2030 and 47% by 2050. And this is essentially what GCF is trying to do and achieve in terms of urban areas and climate mitigation. Next slide. So what are we fighting? We are fighting this. We are fighting increasing level of poverty, very poor urban planning, very low resilience to climate change, and significant mitigation effect that urban areas produce, especially in developing countries. Next slide. If we just see a slide which talks about the relative size of capital cities to the economic product, we will see that, for instance, Jakarta contributes still to about 26% of the Indonesian economy. Manila contributes to about 62% of Filipino economy. Bangkok contributes to about 72% of the Thai economy, and Tokyo contributes to about 26% of the Japanese economy. So if not properly managed, urbanization will continue to increase pressure while developing economic value added. It will continue to increase pressure on energy and natural resources, increase pollution and production of greenhouse gas emissions, and will continue to the overall climate destabilization, which, as we have seen before, can lead to a very significant warming effect. Next slide, please. So what can we do to raise to challenge and address these market failures and negative externalities? So human settlements are vulnerable to the increasing impact of climate change in the absence of resilient infrastructure and planning. So clearly we have to work on that. These trends are expected to grow unless actions are taken to ensure that cities and urban areas are designed to enhance productivity, resilience, and innovation, while reducing the carbon intensity of the economic and social activity, meaning that cities need to continue producing the economic GDP to create jobs and economic stability, but at the same time they have to completely decouple from emissions and pollution, and that's obviously a very tall order. Such efforts will not only generate economic benefits, but will also address the market failures such as urban sprawl, congestions, and negative externalities such as pollution and carbon emission. So the way we do this in GCF is we will be focusing on green rather than smart cities. We'll be pursuing transformative pathways in urban systems. We'll be focusing on retrofitting megacities. We'll be focusing on supporting carbon neutral and carbon negative planning, orientation, and development of secondary and intermediate cities, and we'll be continually supporting catalytic and innovative finance. So if we now look into what really means the green city, and what is a differentiation, taxonomy-driven differentiation with the concept of smart city, which is very important in Korea, is that the green cities or green development is not new. This was used to be coached sustainable development, which seeks to integrate the climate, environmental, social, and economic consideration within the development process. So a green city or green development is an extension of this concept, but understood to contribute to a city of urban area advancing as green, climate conscious, and sustainable. So it's a city that integrates climate and in green thinking in their priority investment in infrastructure development actions. Green urban development considers how to improve and manage the overall climate considerations with a low emission climate resilient investment, worries about the quality and health of its water, air, and land in urban spaces, correlation to hinterlands and wider ecosystem systems services, and the resultant benefit will be derived both by the climate, environment, and residents. That's kind of different than, for instance, Korea's focus on smart cities. Smart city is above all urban area that uses different type of electronic Internet of Things sensors and since relatively recently, artificial intelligence to collect and manage big data in a city. Insights gained from data are used to manage assets, optimize resources and services efficiently. And in return, the data is used to improve the operations across the city, which also benefits climate and environment in total in terms of complete service and efficiency of operations of such a city. And that's the path where Korea is very firmly on. And Korea, as I said earlier, will have significant investment strategy to focus on smart cities in the context of green transformation. From GCF perspective, though, we make a clear distinction. Developing countries are not so advanced. Developing countries, in terms of sequence and orientation, first have to focus on green cities. They have to be focusing on what is in their grasp, and that is a combination of developmental and climate impacting interventions that will make cities prioritize low emissions and climate resilient infrastructure development. Of course, we should laying leapfrog ambitions towards smart city development wherever we can, and we should always be ambitious, but of course the question is of what is the correct sequence. Next slide, please. So transformative actions for cities from GCF perspective are continuous decarbonization of energy sector, improving energy efficiency in the building stocks, continuous focus on mobility and transportation, on urban form, urban resilience, materials and material flow, and improving waste management. And you see on a slide what that means. Just can you go back, please? And you see on a slide what that means in the context of 2030 reduction and what that means in the context of 2050 reduction. And this is for the 2-degree scenario Celsius. Next slide, please. On the other hand, main urban dimensions for creating a smart city, as we can see from Korea, is the continuing support for smart living, smart economy, smart energy efficiencies through smart grids and smart meters and fuel cells, smart governance participation through various communication mechanisms, smart mobility through green transportation and electric vehicles, smart environment through sustainability, which essentially looks into how to reduce the GHG emission by optimizing efficiencies and operations of the main assets in the city, and smart people through governance, which is a bottom-up engagement, green technology research centers, and so forth. Next slide. Theory of change is a very important concept in GCF because theory of change is really telling us what are we trying to change, what are we trying to, if we provide certain level of inputs, what will be the outputs that will permanently change paradigm shifting thinking and transformational investment in the developing countries. They need to move away from the high carbon and low resilient solutions for infrastructure, for services, for assets, for people. So this is actually talks about the outcomes pathways. So we obviously in GCF trying to influence what are the outcomes pathways. So next slide. GCF theory of change therefore looks into, we promote paradigm shifting if the GCF rapidly builds an investment environment and mobilize resources to enable developing countries for transformational climate interventions, then developing countries will demonstratively shift by 2030 towards low emissions and climate resilient development pathways consistent with well below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees Celsius. And because of the increasing share of climate compatible investments will be catalyzed to deliver systemic change. So that's what theory of change is all about. We do that through 4 main pathways: built environment, energy and industries, human security, livelihoods and well-being, and land use, forest and ecosystems. Next slide. So going back to the cities, what are the drivers of change across the GCF results area? We have 4 drivers of paradigm shift. So paradigm shift pathways are, as I said earlier, decarbonized and distributed energy, energy efficiency buildings, green and mobility enhanced cities, circular urban economy, and competent and resilient urban form. And 4 drivers of paradigm shift across these pathways are transformational planning and programming, catalyzing climate innovation, again, something we can learn a great deal from Korea, mobilization of finance at scale, and expansion and replication of knowledge to make sure that lessons learned are replicated. That's essentially what we do here as GCF. Next slide. This is also a little bit complicated slide, but really explains to you what is our added value in terms of city finance trying to go for the climate changing pathways. So we have international institutions that are mobilizing national institutions and coordinated donors and institutional finance for efficiency and leverage. And there we kind of entice the national and subnational governments to work on 4 different areas in terms of access to finance: national capital markets, national commercial banks, national development banks, and obviously international financing that is available for de-risking. From that structure, we support cities and city institutions and support private sector financing. Essentially, very important to know is GCF, for its concessional financing, does not require a sovereign guarantee. We can lend directly to cities or local governments interested in pursuing climate impact and transformational change. Next slide. Also, I would briefly like to touch upon our investment criteria. We have 6 investment criteria in our investment framework. All of our projects need to reach significant impact potential, significant paradigm shift potential, need to be sustainable development potential beyond, not just looking into what one project can achieve, but what the entire set of interventions will achieve, and permanently, if possible. We all obviously have to be responsive to recipient needs, promote country ownership, and finally, make sure that efficiency and effectiveness of our financial instruments is optimized for the optimized impact. Next slide. Now, many of you will know what the black swan theory is. The black swan theory is based on the book of The Impact of the Highly Improbable, which is a 2007 book by author called Nassim Nicholas Taleb. The book focuses on the extreme impact of rare and unpredictable outlier events and the human tendency to find simplistic explanation to these events. A central idea in Taleb's book is not to attempt to predict black swan events, but to build a robustness to negative events and an ability to exploit positive events. In other words, we cannot wait for climate change to become a black swan. All of a sudden, it will just hit us. No, we have to continue realistically developing our capabilities to have a robust and permanent response to negative events and our ability to exploit any positive events that works in our favor, and that's also valid in the climate change. So in the context of COVID-19 crisis, how simplistically we are thinking about the current economic crisis and what is the range and depth of our solutions to this crisis, including the, of course, green recovery. Because what we are aiming at, next slide, is we are aiming actually to use the existing COVID-19 crisis to develop a green transformative action and to support the green economy. Green economy seeks to maximize resilience in the face of climate impacts and to minimize emissions from supply chains and concentrated high energy productions. In other words, terms economic costs, including the external disbenefits of GHG emissions, benefits including impacts avoided by resilience investment, and net benefits to the society are becoming very different from market-derived expenditure, revenues, and profits. All of a sudden, economic analysis and economic benefits that we can deliver in a green transformation become much more important than financial benefits. Next slide. So what we are arguing is the following. The IMF is already saying that the current crisis is the steepest slowdown globally since the Great Depression of the 1930s, with the average over 5% of economies shrink across the globe. Meanwhile, the IMF is supporting that fiscal stimulus packages should be based on green measures, but also trying to recommend scrapping fossil fuel subsidies and taxing carbon. In other words, this is perhaps our opportunity to look into the complete green transition and completely displace fossil economy out of our system. So by building green economy, we can provide both the impetus for economic recovery and at the same time partially support achieving a just transition while making the economy anti-fragile and avoid any black swan theory approaches. In this process, we are building green urban region economies that are providing employment related to the green transportation, construction, value chain, and buildings and distributed energy. In other words, climate investment is becoming the paramount fundamental driver behind the green economy, green transition that will actually going to help the countries not only move away from highly carbonized economy, but it's going to create completely new impetus for the new jobs. On that thought, I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation. And I think we are going to now switch to Sabine Besniat, my colleague, who will be talking about the low carbon transportation that is not only based on technology. Sabine, are you online? There he is. We don't hear you, Sabine.
You don't hear me?
Oh, now it's better.
Okay. How about now? I hope that's good.
So,
Okay.
Sabine, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Rajan, and thank you so much to to SNU for this opportunity. I hope, okay. So I think my slides are showing now. My apologies that I cannot be there with you, with like Drajan and Kabishi. Unfortunately, I am in Nepal at home due to the lockdown. But it's an honor for me to be presenting in this event. So we'll be talking about innovation in transport and going beyond technologies. I think the main, the main issue on this conference is about innovation, and then we're really trying to figure out from a GCF point of view as well, what does innovation mean, and how do we really capitalize on innovation to really kind of make the impacts that Drajan just talked about in the urban sector and going further into the whole climate space as well. As you know, from as Drajan also explained, for the GCF, for any interventions that we take part in, it has to have a climate impact, and therefore transport has a huge climate impact. So therefore, that's why one of the reasons why transport and low emission transport in that instance is a huge thing for us. So let me just get into why we feel transport is such a huge thing in terms of transport paradigm. As you can see, transport consumes about 65% of the total fuel consumption. And then if you really look down into the transport in a nutshell in terms of GHG emissions, you can see that a lot of the emissions that are coming in are really between 45% in this being increased. And then most of the transport emissions and the energy demand is really through road transport, as well as we're seeing a lot more uptake in terms of air as well as marine transport as well. And then as well as moving people, one of the main things that we do in transport is also about moving goods. So freight also accounts for about 40% of the final transport energy as well. So therefore, the transport as a whole, in a nutshell, both moving people, freight, it adds a lot. And then therefore, when you look at it from a total GHG perspective, it's 20% of the total GHG emissions that is coming out. So it's a big part. So I mean, therefore, I think there's a huge role that we can play, not just from the GCF point of view, but also at a global level on transport as a whole. So talking about transport paradigm, and I think this is where I think we kind of really need to get into innovation, right? What does innovation mean? Innovation is derived from a Latin word of innovare, which means renew. So we're trying to basically look at what's out there, and then we're trying to really renew something that's much more better, more important, right? Innovation is about improving or replacing something, it's a process, product, or service. But now this is where I want you guys to focus. I mean, when we talk about innovation, generally, the process and the services kind of get left in the back, in the sidelines, and then we tend to focus on the products a lot. So we're always looking at cool innovations. We look at the iPhone, we look at the new Galaxy S20. So those are products, and those are really innovative stuff, and then that's what really drives us. So and then I think that's not new to the transport sector as well. So I mean, if I say innovation in transport, okay, tell me what you would think about, right? I mean, what comes to your mind as innovation in transport? Does this come to your mind? The Tesla Cybertruck? It probably does. I mean, Kabishi, Drajan, help me out here. I mean, you guys are there, so you can see the audience nodding. So, or how about this? An electric car. I mean, this is BMW, but it could be any other electric car. And you may be thinking, okay, I mean, Sabine is talking about personal vehicles. How about electric buses? Yeah, I mean, I think you guys would think, okay, like, look, electric buses is a new innovation, and everything. And then now you're probably now thinking, Sabine, you're just talking about things on wheels and rails.
Yeah.
I mean, there's much more to.
I think Sabine, the audience here would like to ask you how they can get a loan to purchase a Tesla, if possible. I'm not sure GCF is offering that service yet.
We will get to that. But I mean, aside from the things on wheels, and you may have also think, there's other innovations and innovations and things like batteries. There's new innovation battery, the power systems that are coming into the transport system, hydrogen fuel cells to higher density batteries. So I mean, these are great things. I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong. These are things that are actually driving the sector, that they're really taking us to a new level, but they are products. So we need to kind of, from a GCF, and what we're saying is, let's think a little bit beyond just products. Let's think a little bit beyond to see how do we integrate systems much more. So I would say, how about thinking about things like this? when we're talking about urban transport, have we thought about urban cable car systems? I mean, this is something, that's coming up more and more in Africa as well. We're seeing a lot of that. And then how about even, things like e-rickshaws, which is, for developing countries where we have narrow streets, and a small, maneuverable thing like an e-rickshaw can add a lot of value to this as well. It doesn't just have to be buses and cars and all of that stuff. How about this? I mean, I think, an intelligent traffic management system, just having roads and cars is one thing, but being able to navigate from one point to another in the most effective manner, that's where, we bring in all the good things. And that's, the things that Drajan was also talking about when we're looking at smart systems, smart cities versus green cities as well. It's about really integrating all of this into this. And then even things like this, the T-Money card that we have in Korea, this is it's a seamless way of moving from one mode of transport to another. I mean, you can have this card, use it on the bus, use it in the taxi, use it in the metro. I mean, so with one payment system, it basically takes the hassle out of the person. And then the main thing that we really need to look at from a transport perspective is the mobility. We need to take out the hassle. We need to make sure that anybody that uses transport systems is basically, when they leave the house to go get to one place or the other, that they are really hassle-free. So incorporating all of this is what we're trying to really get at. So that's where the innovation really should come in. I mean, we're looking at innovation from the product, services, as well as to how things are done. So this is something that I would like to raise to you. Are we just going to be talking about transport, or are we talking about mobility? And I think the whole thing we should be geared more towards mobility. Transport basically means, you're moving from point A to point B. That's about it. But what mobility means is mobility is all about gaining that access, being able to provide that the intelligent thinking around how to get from point A to point B in the most effective manner and intelligent manner as possible. So the conversation on transport should really be focused on mobility as opposed to just transport. So this is where we would like to move the conversation as GCF, as a fund that's really looking into green mobility. And I think this should be a global think as well, to really kind of bring forth this new change, to really kind of say, okay, if I'm going to leave my door to go to, let's just say my office, what's the most effective way that I can get there? And then that's where you start thinking about mobility options. And I think that's where we really need to kind of get to. So now, from how do we see it in the GCF? What we see in the reality is that, this 14% of the global emissions is coming in the cities, that's 24% of the total fuel emissions. It's 7.7 gigatons of CO2 in 2017. SOx and NOx. I mean, this is something that we don't monitor specifically from a climate angle, but these are huge pollution levels. These are things that, that really kind of stagnate growth in the cities. I mean, where you see all of these smogs, right? So what we can be looking at is we have the potential to really double the uses with the same level of energy. So basically meaning, being much more efficient, better integrated systems. We're looking into incentives and disincentives policies that really kind of drive the new way of mobility. High visual effect. A nice electric system is a really impactful thing. Electrification is the key, because I mean, what we're seeing a lot more in the whole mobility space is a lot of electrification coming in. And then, this has a potential for 2.5% annual growth in clean transport. I mean, yes, given the pandemic, this number has kind of dwindled down. We're still kind of figuring out exactly what the numbers are, but the growth potentials are still there. And then the investment numbers are huge as well. So the impacts are about, reducing the 7.7 gigatons to around 3 gigatons by 2050. And then reduction of SOx, NOx, as well as fine particulate matters in the local atmosphere. I mean, this is what's really choking a lot of our urban development is the localized pollution. And then, and a majority of that is coming in through fossil-based combustion that comes from, buses and diesel engines. So how do we see it? We see this from 3 angles. We see this from a technology angle, from a policy angle, and from a financing and investment angle. So I talked about the technology. So where are the barriers in the policy? In the policy, there's just too many cooks. The transport sector, the mobility sector is probably the one sector wherein there are so many different policymakers involved. You have the Ministry of Transport, you have the Ministry of Local Development, you have the Ministry of Infrastructure, then you have municipal governments, and there's different branches within the municipal governments. Then you have private sector operators. So there's a lot of people that are in the transport sector to actually develop the policy. So, really kind of coming up with the right level of policy is always really difficult. And then the second part is very disjointed plans. So if you look at countries and developing countries with plans, so your plans are basically almost at three-level plans. So you have your federal government plans on your transport master plan, then you have your state level master plans, then you have your city level master plans. And unfortunately, these three don't talk to each other. So, the plans that the city who basically says, oh, no, this bus is going to be running in my city, so I should have the final say, that person doesn't really get the final say, because it's being drawn down to the federal level as well. So therefore, there's a whole lot of disjointedness in the plans. And then the third part is infrastructure versus mobility. To get the proper mobility into place, you need roads, you need bus stations. Now with electric mobility, you need charging stations. So those are infrastructure needs, and that belongs to someone else. And then whereas the buses and then the trams and wherever you're trying to get at, those are the mobility side. So the infighting between that is also very major as well. And then again, subsidies. Subsidies play a huge role in really kind of bringing in new changes, because there are a lot of countries where either fossil fuel is subsidized or electricity is subsidized, so that providing that incentive for private sector to really come in with a business plan makes it very difficult. And then finally, the last one is concessions, because most of the things, like I said, roads are public sector roads. You have your infrastructure, those are public sector infrastructure. So those need to be operated by an operator, either be it a public sector operator or a private sector operator who's going to make it into a business. So those need some concessions, and those concessions are never ever looked at it from the operator's point of view. It's always looked at it from a policymaker's point of view. So therefore, we need to kind of come to an understanding about how do you do the concessions right. Then you get into financing. Now, financing is another huge hurdle in itself, because when you look at transport and mobility financing, a lot of it is public sector financing. So there's a whole lot of public sector financing, and then most of the times when private sectors are asked to come in, they basically say, okay, look, I'm happy to bring in 10 buses, but the government needs to build the road, or the government needs to build the bus stations. So there's always an eye towards public sector to come in to really kind of start financing. And then there is always this discussion between federal versus local financing. Most of the municipalities that we are working in the developed country scenario, these agencies, the local agencies, do not have the ability to go out and get capital by themselves. They can't raise their own capital, so they rely on federal level financing to come in. So either if there's someone like the GCF coming in, then that has to come through financing, or that's why Drajan also mentioned, when we're talking about municipals, we can go directly into municipals. So I think that's going to basically change some of the dynamics that we're looking at right now. And then the lack of business models. We really need to be more innovative in terms of what are the different types of business models that we bring into the transport sector and the mobility sector. Because right now, what's happening is you're seeing one type of business model that fits all. You build the infrastructure, you get the buses or something on the road, and then someone runs it. That's pretty much how it's run. But we need to kind of figure out, how do we start financing this much more better? What is the different types of de-risking instruments that can be brought in? Is there a way of bringing de-risking instruments? Can we bring in a private-public sector partnership? How does that work? So those type of business models still need to be developed, and then we're really working with our different partners to really kind of look into that as well. And then the third part is diversity in capital. Two things. When you first talk to any city governments or to federal governments, the first thing they say is, oh, we want to do something in mobility. Can you give us grants? One. And then if you basically say, okay, look, grants are not going to be the best way of doing it, say, oh, can you give us loans? And then loans is a little bit more progressive than the grants. But then even on the loans, how do you want to look at loans? Do you want to just look at loans from a credit line? Do you want to look at loans from a de-risking point of view? Do you want to look at it from a guarantee point of view? And do you want to look at it as a senior loan, subordinated loan? There's different ways of cutting this so that it makes sense. And then in the previous session, I think this is something that Marcus mentioned in the previous session. It's not that money is not available; it's the right type of money. And I think this is where we really need to kind of crack the nut here is where do we find what is the type of money that we really need? I mean, we're seeing city governments raising green bonds. I mean, that's a new way of going about getting capital, right? So those are options that can be made into play as well. And then so it's not just about finding the money, it's finding the right type of money, because not every city and not every intervention that we look at is going to fit into a cookie cutter approach. These are all very going to be customizable, and they need to be customized as best as possible. And then again, concessions here again, like I said, for the policy side, concession is a big issue. In financing, also concession is a huge issue, because if you want to get private sector involved in this, they need to basically be made aware that this is how long they will be running things, this is what they have, this is their ability, so then they can really start investing into that avenue as well. So having said all of this, I mean, these are fragmented things, and then so the way we kind of see it from the GCF point of view on how we really kind of move the mobility paradigm is through what we call the integrated mobility planning. So the integrated mobility planning actually encompasses all three elements. Incorporates the policy, incorporates the technology, incorporates the financing into the theory of change that Drajan mentioned as well. It's mainstreaming of policy and regulations, catalyzing innovation, and then new investments coming in, as well as knowledge management. So this is everything fit into a single bucket as much as possible. And then on the integrated mobility planning, we basically look at the integrated mobility planning on the mobility side through what is known as the avoid, shift, and improve model. This is a model that's been propagated by different agencies across the globe that are looking to transport, and then this has some of the meanings going of really kind of having that effect that we really want to really kind of change to a green system. So when we're talking about avoid, I'm sorry, this is going to be a very dense slide. I just wanted to make sure that this avoid, shift, and improve was something that was highlighted as I talk through this. But when you're talking about avoid, I mean we're talking about reducing or shortening trips. We're talking about trying to really kind of see what's the alternative to actually using motorized transport, right? So we're looking at things like non-motorized transport. Bicycles, walking even, and then how do you bring that in? And then and also things like, as Drajan also mentioned, when we're looking at secondary cities also is transit-oriented development. How do you make the whole transit system the main focus of your development, your urban development as well? So where, you can actually start planning things around the transport hub so that you're minimizing transport as well. Telecommuting, I mean, this is something I think all of us during this pandemic are really getting used to, and it's had some effect. Yes, I mean, can we do more of telecommuting? I mean, does everybody need to be in the office every single day? Can we cut back? I mean, it adds both to the work-life balance, but also helps us on the overall on the environment footing as well. And then fiscal policies. I mean, and this is where we're trying to bring in the whole policy angle as well as, how do you start, putting in the road and fuel pricing properly, improve logistics, how are the logistics going to improve, localized projections of systems that are needed. I mean, when we're talking about e-pedicabs, those are things that can be produced locally as well. And then intelligent transport systems, right? So those are things that are really kind of things that we want to kind of bundle into the avoid mixture. I mean, let me just say this. I mean, none of these three parts are mutually exclusive. They are parts of the paradigm, but they can all be combined together as well. I mean, there could be pieces of an avoid system in and shift and then improve as well. So, I mean, but I'm just trying to, see how I can clear things up a little bit. To just kind of give you an idea of our thinking as well as the way our portfolio is framing up as well. On the shift is to basically reduce the emissions per trip. So we're looking into, how do we get into low carbon vehicles and fuels? What are the policy measures to actually improve the efficiency standards? Incorporating taxation and import for incentives for efficiency on more hybrid systems and electric vehicles, financial incentives for mass and public transit using efficient vehicles. So these are really kind of the incentives and congestion charges, as well as parking charges. Because I mean, if you think about it, people need to have that incentive. If let's just say in the weekend, if I need to go to center of Seoul from Songdo, though I may have a car, I will not take that car because I can't find parking, or the parking prices are going to be just too much. So I will take a bus to Seoul. I mean, so I'm basically shifting my behavior, right? So, and then, it's about public procurement. How do you bring public procurement into the rolling stock? I mean, public procurement has a huge bonus to play, especially in the transport sector, because, I mean, like I said, a lot of the things are going to be public in the public domain. So the public sector has a huge role to play as well. And PPPs, we need to get more public-private sector partnerships going, and then to really get bulk procurement going. And then on the improved side as well, is again, looking at things like, how do you bring in efficient tires, eco-driving, improved load factor. You're looking at how do you basically improve the road conditions and the traffic conditions so that, you're really kind of improving the whole efficiency of the system as a whole, fleet management and sizing. For logistics operators, designing the fleet management to make it the most efficient possible as well. Road taxes and even carbon tax that come in, as well as feed-in tariffs for EVs and PHEVs. Because I mean, this is going to be a new thing that's coming in. If you're going to be bringing in more EVs, that's going to be charging the electric grid. So how do you really kind of incentivize that coming in through a feed-in system? Financial products and credit lines, like I said, for equipment, for leasing facilities. Split incentives. I mean, I think this is something that we should be really looking into in the transport sector as well. I mean, like I said, though it's a public domain, so if the public is in charge of the infrastructure and they get paid out on the infrastructure side, then you have the private sector really rolling out the rolling stocks, right? So this is things that we're seeing a lot in the railway operations, both in Korea as well as we're seeing this in Europe as well, right? So wherein you have those things in place. Special purpose vehicles. How do we design for special purpose vehicles that build in elements of a private sector deal with public sector also contributing into this as well? I mean, there's a lot of ways of doing it, and it can be done much more effectively as well. Talking about instruments again is the risk guarantees. How do you basically bring in more private sector is really kind of, gauging the risk factors, and then really, designing de-risking instruments that are that can help, as well as bringing in, vendor financing. There are a lot of technologies out there. We need to basically make sure that, if Tesla is going to come into Korea, how does Tesla, can we bring Korea, and then how do you really bring that in? Or how do you get Hyundai to really kind of, move more of that Kona across the globe as well? So, I mean, and, because from an OEM point of view, they want to sell more of their equipment. So if they can basically work with cities and governments to really kind of, bring in the best technologies out there, they are willing to come in and provide some level of financing and discounts that could really move the markets, right? So I think this is where the whole idea is integrated mobility planning capsulated in the ASI model with all of the technology, policy, and financing built in. So this is how we're trying to look at things. So, and then having said that, so aside from that, we also really need to kind of figure out, I mean, when you're looking at it from a city point of view, how does it look from a GHG point of view? And then how does it look from a footprint point of view? Because from a passenger footprint, I mean, and an EV is an awesome thing when you look at it from a GHG point of view, but as you look at it from a passenger footprint, it's a pretty big footprint, right? So your best option could be, looking at it at a bus system, which has a really low GHG, but at the same time has a very low footprint as well. So for city planners, for the integrated planning, it's not, you have all of these three things, but also the technical part. How does everything fit in? And then having said that, I mean, this little thing, this is my new electric vehicle that we bought, right? So I live in Kathmandu. It's not a huge city. I mean, we are surrounded by a 26-kilometer ring road. So we had an option of buying a Kona or a Kia Nitro, a MG electric, or this Mahindra small little tiny car. And then, from our footprint point of view and from our GHG point of view, I mean, we, Nepal is a totally green grid. So our, electric basically it's zero. But from looking at it from footprint, we thought, okay, this is the best option for us, because I mean, this is a, a 16 kilowatt motor, gives me 100 kilometers per day on a full charge. This is enough for me. So this is where, it's a small thing. I mean, I just want to bring in my personal experience, because when you're putting things in place, it's awesome to have a Cybertruck, but do you really need a Cybertruck? Right. So I think so. This is where both city planners as well as government planners need to really think about how does the footprint really kind of jive with what is the need of the country and the city at that moment when they're looking at their mobility plans. And then finally, just to kind of wrap things up on another initiative is the like I talked about transit-oriented development. This is where we're really looking at, as Drajan also said, when they're looking into secondary cities and really kind of developing that green cities network, is to really kind of use the transport hub as a means of really developing the secondary city around this. So you're trying to make it as compact as possible. You're trying to really kind of bring in the different nodes, different non-transport vehicles as much as possible, so that it becomes much more of a livable city where things are much more closer and business and activities are closely linked. So one of the benefits of the TOD is, it reduces the dependence on driving. So we're trying to get away from the fossil driving as much as possible. It allows people to live and work and play in the same area. So you're really kind of in this whole community feel. And these are things, when you're really looking at it from an Asian perspective, these are things that we've been doing for the longest time. It's part of our DNA, but as we've developed, we've kind of gone away. We're getting into much more of the suburban feelings. I think we need to kind of, bring that, community feeling into the suburbs as well. And this is where the TOD becomes a huge thing, because TOD basically with something like an LRT system, as you see down there, that can be the nodes that really develop the different parts of the cities as well. And plus it is, it's about developing the whole urban setting. It's developing about, developing the transport system. It's developing business. It's, it's a holistic development in all nature of this word. And finally, I just want to end by showing you this one transport project that we have approved in the GCF. This is a GCF ADB green BRT system in Karachi. A BRT system is a bus rapid transit system, which again, like you saw in the TOD system, which is the vertebrae that runs across one major part of the city. So Karachi has 5 different hubs that they're planning BRT systems. So we just invested in one transport line. And the innovation in this project is multiple. One is just the construction. The construction is very climate-friendly construction, wherein we're providing about $7 million of grants to basically climate-proof those roads. So there's a lot of flooding it's a coastal city, so there's a lot of flooding. So we're basically providing construction work and cement work, concrete work that basically drains that road very quickly. So there's an adaptation portion. The main part that we're financing is the bus system, which is a biomethane bus, a hybrid bus. And this is the first biomethane hybrid bus system in the world, wherein we're producing biogas from a nearby cow farm and then feeding into the bus system. And then aside from that, like I said, so the BRT system forms the vertebrae. But then, from the vertebrae, you need to get home. So there's that last mile connectivity. And that's, what I was showing in the TOD system as well, was the last mile connectivity. We're actually doing that through e-pedicabs, as well as with bicycles, bike sharing and all of that. So that, you're from your house to the BRT system, there's no worries. You can get a bicycle or you can get an e-pedicab, you can get to the BRT system, and then from the BRT system, you can get to the next station. And then from there, there's another e-pedicab that takes you to your work or to your pleasure or leisure. So that part is very well. And then in terms of financing is also really cool, because what we did here was we took a look at the total cost of operation of the whole bus system, and then developed a leasing model on that. So the government, because this, like I said, this is a really cool PPP model, wherein the government is actually procuring the buses on a bulk procurement. So we're getting a huge discount from the OEM on this. And then that buses is being given over to the private sector, who operates on a total cost of ownership leasing model, which basically helps them to really kind of get into the system and then really kind of own the bus. And then after 6 years, the bus is theirs. And then the other part about this is the O&M is actually incorporated into the lease. So therefore, there's no reason for the private sector operator to say, oh yeah, I don't want to pay for O&M, because that's always been a huge part. So so that's already incorporated in the leasing model. So therefore, even if they don't use it, that's already being paid for. Therefore, people will use it. And then the beauty of this is we're using biogas. So there's a cattle farm right nearby Karachi, which is a massive cattle farm with 100,000 heads of cattle, and therefore that's producing biogas, which we're sweetening to a natural gas level BTU, and then feeding that into the system. Now, the best thing about this is what we just concluded the feasibility of the biogas system a couple of months ago, and we just found out that the biogas that can be produced from there will not just only feed our line, but it will feed 2 other lines. So therefore, the next 2 lines in Karachi are also going to be the same biogas methane hybrid system. So this is how we bring paradigm shift replication into the country as well. So in a nutshell, this is really about how the integrated model works. It's about really providing that planning part, which the government of Pakistan already had, and then we brought it to the Karachi level with ADB, and then ADB created this Trans-Karachi system that basically helped to create all of this, and then we brought in the financing as well as the technology, everything into this. So this is the kind of things that we're looking at, where we have a lot of our portfolio that's coming up has a lot of these kind of measures in there, and then we're looking to do much more, and then we're really looking towards you to bring us more of these projects, and then to make mobility green and clean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabine. And you still didn't tell us how we get cheap loans to buy Teslas. Okay, maybe in other parts.
That was the leasing model. That was the leasing model. So we get the government to do bulk procurement and we get leasing.
I will just give the audience your mobile phone number. How about that?
There you go. There you go.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Very insightful presentation on urban mobility. Can we have applause for Sabine, please? Sabine, we did receive a lot of questions for both aspects of urban presentation and transportation presentations, but we will wait and give floor to our dear colleague Abishi, who's going to talk more about strategic perspective of GCF readiness for developing countries. Abishi, you have it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Drazen. I do appreciate. And first of all, I'd like to say how pleased I am to be amongst you. Thank you to SNU and in particular to Professor Jun-Seok Hwang and to our colleague John Song, who has kindly invited us into this. It is my distinct honor, following on the thoughts that were shared by Drazen and by Sabine, and before that also the panel discussion that we had chaired by Anya. To now talk a little bit about what the GCF does in order to make sure that countries are empowered to be able to access climate finance. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the developing countries whom we assist do have the wherewithal, whether it's the capacity or the planning ability, in order to be able to tackle the challenges of climate change. And that is what I'll be talking about a little bit more today. One of the things that we do at the GCF, as you know, we do have this mandate. You probably have seen this before, this history line of the GCF, but our governing instrument in particular gives us this mandate of supporting developing countries so that they are able to face the challenges of the climate change. They did not contribute very much to it, but unfortunately, they are amongst the most vulnerable. So we have to make sure that we empower them in order for them to be able to react to that. The Green Climate Fund is a very interesting institution. No, it's a financial instrument of the UNFCCC, the United Nations for Climate Change. And there are several features that make it particular. First of all is that we are purely dedicated to climate change. We, of course, contribute to economic development, but at the end of the day, our main business is helping countries fight against climate change. We also have an approach that is capital agnostic, so that gives us the ability to really contribute to innovation, because we do not stop at whether or not we should be looking at the financial returns. And we also have several financial instruments that we can be using, going from grants and loans, but also trying to get into some more innovative forms of financial instrument, including various forms of risk sharing and even putting in capital like into incubators that are very good for innovation. But also in the model that we operate at, we're a partnership institution. So which means that we actually want to leverage the little amount that we do have, both in financial abilities and also in our small staffing levels, in order to actually empower a whole series of partners to work with us. And whether it is accredited entities, which are the ones that actually develop funding proposals that we'll be investing in, or what we call delivery partners, which are then the ones that will help us into improving the capacity of our various countries. And one of the main features and one of the main tenets of the GCF is what we call country-drivenness. What we do has to correspond to what the countries have decided are their priorities. Of course, these priorities do come from various strategic documents like the NDCs, the National Declared Contributions, the National Planning Capacity, as well as also their various and respective development and social plans. But these are the guidance documents that should be telling the countries, here are their priorities, and then given what the countries then decide on the priorities, us as the GCF will come and partner with them and make sure that they are able to contribute and to put ambitions. You know that the GCF went through a second phase of resource mobilization. We managed to mobilize about very close to $10 million. And we hope that will be contributing to our new strategy that we have. The main thing that we want is actually to increase the ambition. Drazen, Sabine, Anya and Joseph and other panelists have pointed to the fact that the IPCC has mentioned that we are we're at the great risk of not even being able to be at that 2% increase of temperature that we're thinking of. And like Drazen said, we might even be going to a model where it will be more like 2.4 up to 4 how much was it again, Drazen? 4.6 again. So you see that is a very challenging threat that we're facing. And because of that, we have to raise the ambitions of our interventions. We cannot just stop at business as usual or even just like, tiptoeing just around the issue. We have to be able to have higher impact. And that is what the GCF wants to do in this second period of its life, from 2020 to 2023, we want to increase the ambition. And that increased ambition was going to be coming through helping the countries in having higher ambitions and higher targets into the strategy that they'll be presenting to us, and also being able, using or considering our business model of second degree or second level due diligence, use that to leverage it and be able to achieve the higher ambitions that they'll be having. So for 2023, and I'll try to go a little fast through these. Excuse me, I was going a little too fast there. There are a few things that we want to do. We want to make sure, and if you look at the bottom left side of this slide, we want to make sure that we want to build the capacity of our partner countries in order for them to bring transformational programming. And this is what I'll be talking mostly about. Sabine and Drazen and the other panelists that we had before talked about some specific sector interventions that we could have. But one of the things that will facilitate all of that is if the countries can provide appropriate guidance through the country programs and the other forms of strategies that they'll be having. And in order for them to be able to do that, at the GCF, we want to make sure that we build the capacity of the countries in order to have this transformational programming. Also, because we are facing these increased threats, we also want to make sure then that we can leverage all the capacity of these countries as much as possible, and that's when it becomes interesting then to bring in a regional approach to these. So with a regional approach, we want to make sure that we can have and make use, whenever they are possible, economies of scale, and whenever it's possible that we also then disseminate the knowledge that will have been learned from the successful interventions. And sometimes even when they're not successful, it's still, we can have some very good lessons. So because of that, going for a regional approach whenever it is possible enables us to have an increased impact. And that is what we want to be helping our countries to do. The readiness program, it's one of the main areas that we work through at the GCF in order to provide our partnering countries, the developing countries, to make sure that they are able to, using the various planning documents and the various contributions and ambitions that they have, that they give themselves the capacity that is needed for them to translate these plans and these ambitions that they have into actual investment programs and planning for fighting climate change. And these can come through strategies that will be embodied into the country programs, but also through the capacity building, whether it be capacity building for the national designated authorities, which are the counterparts between the GCF and the countries, or various entities at country level or at regional level, which enable the implementation of the strategies. And those can be accredited entities, as well as the delivery partners that we talked about. So, and we also want to make sure that these increased ability of the countries is reflected into an enabling environment and into frameworks, investment frameworks that are conducive to increased implementation. So we want to make sure through our readiness program that we can address that. As of today, the readiness program globally has had like 396 proposals that we have, so that's not bad at all. And through those 396 proposals, we've actually committed $269 US dollars for that. So this is all money, all through a form of grants, by the way, so no repayment coming from that we've been giving to our partnering countries. Out of these 269 million, we've already disbursed about 123 million. So there's still more coming through, and as today, we still receive these compliments. We're going to be talking in particular about the LAC region, and we'll start by the LAC region because they are the ones amongst all the regions that we work in that have gone a little bit further and fastest as far as bringing in some regional programs. Out of the 116 readiness proposals that we've had from the LAC, there are quite a few of them that have been put into a regional approach. And I'll skip through these. This is just something that shows how the readiness comes and helps us into the whole value chain of the GCF. That means starting from the strategy level and taking us all the way to actual investments in projects. And that goes through increasing the capacity of the countries and the various entities that are involved in there. But you can go through there at your leisure looking at that. But let's look at the case of LAC. As of today, LAC has already have like eight projects or eight actually not funding proposal, but readiness proposals that have been approved. And you're gonna excuse my bad eyes, but I read much easier on something that's closer to me here. We can blame age on that, no? So they have 8 proposals that have at various levels put together a whole number of countries that are then leveraging their capacity, using the budget that they have, putting it together in order to address various issues. So if we take, for instance, one example, here we have a delivery partner that's a regional delivery partner in the Caribbean. So that's the first one that for building capacity for regional approach to climate action in the Caribbean. Out of that, they are mobilizing 1.8 million US dollars in order to serve Jamaica, St. Lucia, Belize, Dominica, Haiti, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. These are particularly vulnerable countries, as you know. The SEEDs, as we call them, the small insular developing states, are, in addition to being small, they also they face, particular threats from the climate change, and they are probably the first ones that will be affected, for instance, by the rising levels of water. So those are particularly targets for the GCF. They're among some of our constituencies that we pay attention to the most. And so with the 5 Cs, which is the name of the delivery partner, which, by the way, is also an accredited entity at the GCF, we have put together these readiness proposal that will be building on the capacity of those 5 countries to address climate change. We also have, for instance, in a second case, a readiness proposal that supports the development of a credit risk abatement facility for what we call the CARICOM states. And those are, again, the states in the Caribbean, and that includes 2 countries, Belize and St. Lucia. And we have a whole list here, but there is one that is of particular importance for us that we'll get to a little later, where actually the SNU is also involved in, and that comes into the e-mobility. So that is something that my colleague Sabine will also be very happy with. So we have here already approved 8 multi-country or regional proposals, readiness proposals in Latin America and the Caribbean, for a total of about $10 million. But that is not the end of it. We still have in the pipeline, and when we say in the pipeline, that means proposals or projects that are still in development or being reviewed at various levels in the GCF. We still have from Latin America and the Caribbean another 8 readiness proposals that are in various levels of review for a total of a little less than $19 million. And that will be covering quite a few countries. So these are examples of how we want to build and help our countries, our partnering countries, to get together and use as a leverage the contribution that the GCF gives them for capacity building, for bringing their strategy document and translating them into investment plans, and for also making sure that they create the enabling environment for basically them to be ready to access climate finance at a larger scale. So we're going to go into a couple more examples here. In particular, this one here is a readiness proposal for $1.2 million, which will be developed over 24 months with LEDE as the delivery partner. Guatemala, Argentina, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Paraguay, and Uruguay are the countries that are concerned, and that will be enhancing climate finance and investments in Latin America. At the end of the day, what we want is for the countries to be ready to tap into the GCF at a larger scale, but also into other sources of climate finance. And this is one of the examples of a readiness proposal that will be helping doing that. And we hope that in 24 months down the line, we'll be able to see a greater access to climate finance for those countries that were put in there. Here is another project that is of quite interest for us because I believe that's the one that SNU is involved in. And this is for advancing a regional approach to e-mobility in Latin America. And that one is led by UN Environment. Involves about $2.8 million as the amount in the proposal, and will be implemented over a 30-month period. And as you see, there is a large number of countries that are involved in there. You can see that on the right-hand side. And this is another very good example of a readiness program that, in the end, will enable for the innovation that can be brought through e-mobility, whether it is at the technical level or whether it is at the level of financial instruments to be deployed in all of these countries that you see. And that will be able then to create a strong pipeline of projects then that our colleagues like Sabine and Drazen can then usher through our review process. Now, in addition to just being innovative, in addition to be country-driven, the interventions of the GCF also need to look at the needs of the recipients. You may remember that Sabine addressed that a little earlier, as well as some other colleagues. Amongst the investment criteria that we have, we also look at the needs of the recipient. And one of the things that has occurred to us, as we all know, is this COVID-19 crisis. The COVID-19 crisis affected the entire world, and in particular has made vulnerable countries even more vulnerable. And the GCF is proud to have been able to react very quickly to the needs of its partnership countries, and be able then to provide some relief through the COVID-19. The relief has come through various forms. On the readiness side, we've implemented what we call some type of adaptive management, which enables us then to look at the change need of the recipients and then accommodates them in the timeline of the implementation, and also make available some additional budget, but also make sure that we can assist them if they do need to conduct some additional analysis in order to see what is the planning modifications that they need to bring to respond to COVID-19. And in that perspective, we have here an example of these readiness proposal, which is COVID, climate and economic recovery, that covers the health, water, food security, and green jobs and technological innovation. So here we actually have quite a few areas that are covered. The budget is about $1.5 million. It should be implemented over 24 months. And you have quite a few countries that are involved in there: Ecuador, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, Guatemala, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay, and even Cuba that will be involved. And you can also see there that the Seoul National University is involved into this readiness proposal. So I'd like to thank you, but I will still want to share a few more things with you here. We do not have only the Latin America and the Caribbean region that are using this regional approach. We also have other regions of the country, in particular the African continent. And also we do provide support at the global level. We do have with the UN, the UNDP, the UN Development Program, we do have support for 20 countries through a readiness proposal, which will help them bring up to date their NDCs, the national determined contributions, but also move further than that, not just bring them up to date, but also start the implementation of those NDCs so that they can lead to some investment planning. These will be covering 20 countries, and that will be deployed by UNDP. In addition to this one, we also have at the global level a similar NDC support readiness proposal that is developed by GGGI. We all know GGGI very much in Korea. They do have headquarters here, and they will be covering, for the same purpose as the UNDP proposal, they'll be covering 15 countries. We do also have in Africa 4 readiness proposals that involve various countries, and that are various ways of review. One of them will be accelerating financing and implementation of low carbon for agriculture and energy for agriculture. It will cover about 25 countries, and it is using Ernst & Young as a delivery partner. And that is related to what we call the Adaptation in Agriculture Initiative for Africa. As you know, Africa is one of the regions in the world where agriculture is the main activity of at least 70 to 75% of the population, but it's also one of the most vulnerable regions in the world. So we want to make sure that through this readiness proposal and similar interventions, we provide our partners with the capacity to adapt. And these readiness proposal will be helping 25 countries in making sure that they do create the proper environment and generates necessary pipeline for projects that would enable them to increase their adaptation ability in agriculture and in energy for agriculture. We also have, and still here, and by the way, that one is looking at about 8.5 million US dollars. We have another one, also with Ernst & Young as a delivery partner, which concentrates on the land use and forestry in about 10 countries for a budget of a little less than $1 million. Another one is also for the region, for the countries mostly in Central Africa, the creation of a Red Plus Catalytic Fund for about $500,000 that will be covering 5 countries. And finally, another example that we like to give, still for the Central African region in what we call the Congo Basin Blue Fund, is the support that the GCF will be providing for the operationalization of the Blue Fund of the Congo Basin. That one again will be with Ernst & Young, and will be having a budget of about 2.5 million. So those are other examples that we have of this regional approach that the GCF is supporting the countries so that we can use that as a leverage and again use economies of scale, put all these countries' resources together and have then a pipeline of more impactful projects. So I will stop there and looking forward to questions that you may have. Thank you, Drezen. Back to you.
Thank you, Kabishi. Very inspirational. So we have now seen what we are doing and can do from the perspective of readiness, and what countries can do to enhance their prioritization and local capacity to boost the GCF and climate financing. I would like to advise the audience and as well as our speakers that we have received quite a few of questions. We have questions for Kabishi, we have questions for Sabine, and questions for me, and obviously all 3 of us can answer. So maybe given that we are with freshest impressions on Kabishi, I will convey the 2 questions we have from the readiness perspective. Questions on countries' readiness. Is it a reality or just a big phrase or a banner of GCF? What is the most critical barriers on a pathway and realizing country-driven approach fully? So do we really do just a lip service, or we are really believing what we are saying, and what are the really critical barriers on a pathway and realizing this country-driven approach? And the second question is, are there different priorities by regions of Africa, Latin America, or Asia that are most importantly pursued by countries? So in other words, what is the regional differentiation and how GCF and countries themselves really determine the investment priority from GCF perspective? Thank you, Kabish. Sabine and I will join later on this.
Thank you very much, Drazen. Those are very good questions. And especially the first one, as a country-drivenness, is it really just a word or is it actually a reality? First of all, as you mentioned, it's a very important principle of how the GCF operates. However, for country-drivenness to be able to be effective, our countries need to be empowered for them to know how to actually generate those strategies and translate those strategies into the actual plans and the projects that we'll be supporting. So it is still a work in progress in that sense, but you have very, very good examples of countries and groups of countries that have done so. There are a few things that the GCF does in order to try and make this into a reality. Is first of all assisting countries through what we call country programming, if they so wish to develop a strategy, a document strategy that will combine all the various sources of inspiration that we've seen, NDCs, NAPs, and so on, and the development goals of the country into specific climate action document that will say how they want to engage with the GCF, including on the choice of partners that they will have and the pipeline development. But also at the same time, we do help them in supporting them for the capacity building that they need, both at the level of the NDA, National Designated Authorities, and at the level of the entities to work. And we also make sure that when it comes to projects, the countries are always consulted, and there's no project at the GCF that can be submitted to the board until we have been able to check that the countries have given their approval. That comes through what we call the NOL, which is the non-objection letter. But actually, the NOL is not just a document. It's a whole process that the various countries have set so as to make sure that there is consultation of the various stakeholders so that in fine, the countries decide whether the projects are indeed in alignment with the priorities and whether the needs of the recipients are all satisfied, and whether the project, the way it is, developed by the accredited entity, will meet the needs of the countries. And the GCF will not get in the path of any country that would say that for a reason or another, they have not, the project has not been in a manner that satisfies the country, has not been through this NOL process. So this is how we make sure that country-drivenness is a reality at the GCF. But at the same time, it's an ongoing process, and that is why we use readiness in particular in order to make sure that the countries do have the capacity to actually conduct the choices that they want to make. And then the other question that you have, and I do apologize, that was a long answer, but country-drivenness is important for us. And the other question was about whether there are differences at regional levels and even within regions in the priorities. Yes, there are differences in the priorities, and that is normal. The differences reflect not just the different levels of vulnerabilities, the different risks that they're facing, but also the potential that each one of those regions do have. So because of that, depending on the regions that you'll go to, you'll see different priorities. For instance, if you go to the Caribbean, issues of resilience in the built infrastructure might be greater than if you look at some areas, let's say for instance in the middle of the Sahel in Africa, where then it's more an issue of the management of water resources that are more salient. So we will have differences like that. And for instance, if you go in Indonesia, or if you go in Central Africa, where you do have a very big reserve of peatlands, there, because of these opportunities and because of this particular state where you have a huge capture of carbon into the peatlands, then the priorities will probably be different. And so that is why we, in the same way as we are capital agnostic, we also do not make the choices for our countries of what the priorities are, and we let them decide on what their priorities are, reflecting these differences. And what we do is then just accompany them through the projects and the readiness. I hope that was a good start to answer to the questions.
Well, and if it wasn't, we will hear very soon. No? Thank you very much, Kabishi, for focusing on these questions and explaining GCF point of view. Sabine, are you on a line? Sabine, are you connected? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you?
Okay, very good. There are several questions to Sabine and obviously to all of us, but we will focus on transportation issues. The first question is on transportation mobility. What are the most critical barriers in Nepal and other developing countries in Asia to innovate mobility systems?
That's actually a great question. And like I mentioned before in my presentation as well, I think the biggest barriers that we have on innovation in developing countries, and then even if you're looking at Nepal, is the planning. Because I think, like I said, we need to have proper planning in place where the countries are really focused on what is the need of the country in terms of their mobility plan and how the mobility systems are going to be set up. And then, how does that basically equate at the national level? How does that equate at the provincial level? And how does that equate at the city and the municipal level, right? So that's a huge barrier. And then if we can basically get that picture correct, and if we can actually understand exactly, okay, this is how things are going to work out, then that actually opens up the doors to exactly different types of project interventions that can actually happen. Right, so just to kind of give you an example, the best example that I can give to you is the BRT systems in Pakistan, for instance. When Pakistan was really looking at the national strategy in terms of how do they get into public transport, there was a lot of options. They could have done buses, they could have done LRT systems, they could have done railway systems, and then they figured out, okay, let's try out BRT. They tried out the BRT in Islamabad. It worked out magnificently. I mean, everything kind of went in and they saw the system work. Then all of a sudden that kind of clicked into a planning stage where, it's like, okay, we're going to do at a national level into city levels, we're going to do BRTs. And then once the BRT system kind of came into place, then the cities and the states started to get involved, right? So in case of for Karachi, the government of Sindh basically said, okay, we'll take on the BRT systems. This is what we need. We need to set up a public commission that's going to be operating this. So they set up Trans Karachi, and then based on that, then the Trans Karachi, then the Karachi came in, and Karachi basically started developing where the BRT systems were going to be, what are the systems going to be looking like, what's the routing going to look like, and then that, then all of a sudden, once all of that was done, that's when then they came up with the plans. So then you had ADB coming in with GCF on one route, and then now you have the World Bank coming in another route, and then you have another plan. So this just brings things. So I think the planning is the critical part. The right planning and building everything together, that's just crucial.
Wonderful, Sabine. And the second question is, do you see a possibility of regional collaboration or integration to put integrative efforts to transform mobility systems to climate resilient and sustainable paradigm platform?
That's a huge yes. That's a huge yes. And this is done in a multiple manner. The example that Kabishi just gave to you on the LAC mobility. So it's 8 countries that are looking at readiness, using the readiness funds to start up with the mobility planning in Latin America. Now, how has that been broken down? So there are multiple countries where they're just looking at the planning portion of it. There are a couple of countries where they're looking at the policy portions of it, and there's a couple of countries that are looking at the technology portions of it. Now, the focus is there, but all 3 elements are actually coming in together. So when, let's just say this readiness program is done, what we will get is a regional mobility master plan that has how to develop an integrated transport mobility plan, you have a policy plan, and you have a technology plan. So therefore, multiple countries. So let's just say if Chile was the one that was looking at how to bring in e-buses, and Nicaragua was the one that was looking at planning. But after this, then all of a sudden, what happens is that when Nicaragua is ready to buy their buses, they can basically go to the same manufacturers or the same people and basically say, hey, we want the same buses that you gave to Chile. So all of a sudden, then though Nicaragua may need only 50 buses, but given that there's going to be an economies of scale, then all of a sudden that the procurement level starts to kind of go up. Then the other part on the policy and then the financing part as well is if a system actually works in one country, for instance, I mean, if let's just say in Uruguay, if you're already setting up a de-risking tool with a PPP and at a municipal, then that's the same system that can be actually replicated to other countries. So the value that we see in regions really getting into the mobility, because at the end of the day, what you really need to focus on is that the technology that's there, it's pretty much, it's proven technology. It's only about how do we address those technologies in the best possible way to make sure that it becomes effective and efficient for that country and that city, right? So therefore, bringing all of these multi-regional learnings together into a leveraged, system is what we're looking at, and I think this will be something that we're really looking forward to as well. I mean, I think that's why we're really chasing down Kabishi and his other colleagues working in Latin America to really see exactly what's happening on the mobility side, so that we can really make sure that we enhance that and we, socialize that as much as possible.
That's great, Sabine. Thank you very much. I now have some questions also for my presentation, but feel free, you and Kabishi, if you want to chip in and answer further questions or make further comments, please. Question on urban environment is, how does green transformation relate to smart city initiatives and digitalization of urban infrastructure? I think what we see at GCF in terms of sequence of making cities prioritizing climate action is that we see that the developing country cities are fighting far too many barriers and challenges to move very quickly and very rapidly towards smart city orientation. So what we argue is that both megacities and secondary cities in developing countries should focus on Green City Action Plan, prioritize most critical low carbon and resilient infrastructure investments, and start creating a level playing field through GCF concessional resources to de-risk and create an upscaling potential for these green projects to become a little bit bigger and a little bit more ambitious. So if that transition is done correctly with the right set of green priority investments and with the right focus on low carbon emissions and decarbonizing the city infrastructure and so forth, you will first of all see the rise of green jobs. You will see the eventual fundamental basis of big data emerging, and this will be some critical triggers to move on to the smart city infrastructure. But I think that the time loop between creating a functioning green city in developing countries versus creating a smart city orientation is solidly 10 years. Some countries can do it faster, some countries slower, and obviously I don't want to stop or any country's ambition to move towards smart city focus. But in our experience, in terms of developmental cycles, focus on climate, on environment, on low carbon, on decoupling economic growth from the high carbon emissions, the city in developing country usually has to go through a number of stages before it is ready to encompass, to embrace a much more ambitious smart city orientation. So that's my answer. There's also a second question on urban environment. Will there be opportunities to mobilize citizen money, private assets, through innovative financial instruments? Well, we have several projects which are either currently working or will be working on creating a roadmap for cities to enter capital markets. Now, obviously, when we discuss the private assets of the citizens, the most important asset we can think of are pension funds. Pension funds will not be investing, and that's one of the main challenges in the when private sector is discussing investment in climate, is that obviously pension funds are very risk averse, and they'll be investing in only in a specific set of assets that have a proper credit rating and proper capital market rating, and they would not be venturing anything that is more risky than that. Obviously, early or even mid-stage climate projects are much more riskier. They do not have a very clear returns, and they are considered to be still an area where we are mixing concessional financing with public financing initially, de-risking it, creating economies of scale and scope, and then eventually building it up towards private sector and capital markets, and that's where hopefully most of the citizens' money can be re-emerging through pension funds or maybe dedicated investment funds back into the city infrastructure. But that road is quite long. So again, the best way to bridge this gap, and we do not think there is a quick answer or very quick leapfrog, like there is no quick answer or quick leapfrogging strategy to move from green city to smart city. There is also not a very quick way to all of a sudden become the majority of cities who are big emitters in developing countries to say all of a sudden now we are absolutely ripe for private investment. No, we are not. But what we can create is a roadmap for capital markets. So what cities, or maybe agglomeration of cities, it is important always to have a proper scale, can do to improve the financial basis, to improve the fundamental values of their assets, to maybe aggregate assets in such a way that eventually they can receive a credit rating and work more on a P&L basis, profit and loss basis, and create some form of a corporation that could be eventually be launched or through the IPO or capital markets. And then these assets then become tradable and can be assets that can be considered for the investment by the pension funds or some other investment vehicles by the private citizens. But again, road is very, very complicated. So obviously, we do make a major distinction between major cities emitters who are in developed countries and major cities emitters who are in developing countries, or even secondary cities who are emerging through their economic growth to become potentially very high emitters. So that gap between understanding of risk and understanding of credit valuation and understanding a proper fiscal arrangement and capital markets arrangement is something that is still a significant gap. As long as pension funds and private money do not have a more appetite for risk, as long as they follow very stringent capital markets and fiscal and taxation regulations, there'll be an obstacle of bringing more citizen private money into the city. So the question is always of transition mechanisms, of roadmap to capital markets, and what can we do to improve the overall financial, economic, and transparent financial performance of cities and agglomeration of cities to eventually become tradable asset material. I hope this answers your questions. Obviously, Kabishi and Sabine, if you want to add anything to these questions, please do so.
Sorry, Razan, I think you've done a masterful job. The only thing maybe I would like to just reinforce something that you said is on the importance of the enabling environment, because as you properly said, for the private investors to be able to participate through the capital markets to funding the smart cities, you do have the need for all these conditions that you've cited to be able to be satisfied. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important for the countries to work on the enabling environment so that then they can increase their ability to mobilize funds. So I think it's a fantastic example of that you've given of where country-drivenness should take us to eventually.
But then, Kabishi, there is a follow-up question. So if countries have to work on enabling environment and on the regulatory framework that enables the city assets to become tradable, what are we doing from readiness perspective to help these countries move forward?
Actually, on the readiness side, a little bit like the example that we've seen on e-mobility in Latin America, we are in discussion with various delivery partners on having similar programs that can cover also smart cities. Smart cities actually are, like you've so appropriately pointed out, a very important priority for almost all countries, just because of the not just the emissions that that occur from there, but also the proportion of the populations that live in there. So we are also in various stages of development of this type of regional readiness programs that will also apply for smart cities, both in Africa and in LAC. And we hope to see more of those.
Thank you. Sabine, can you join this discussion and maybe tell us how do you see from transportation and e-mobility perspective, what are the preconditions and channels for the involvement of the private capital and specifically citizens' own funds into tradable assets and supporting the climate-focused urban growth? Over to you.
Yeah, I think you guys both covered it very well. I think I was really good. I mean, I think the one part that I wanted to comment was on the enabling environment, which Kabishi just covered as well. But I think the clear indication there is, to get, pension funds or even any other institutional investors into cities is really about defining the asset class. I mean, I think we won't really get, a full buy-in into a whole city until, you get a creditworthiness of the city. But what we can do as an incremental step is to really kind of subdivide the different interventions into different types of asset class, which can be, again, delineated into different, rating systems, and then, really kind of bring that up. Because I mean, and that, I think that's one way of really kind of bringing in the different types of diversified capital that I was just talking about in my presentation as well. Because, there are a lot of investors out there who are looking to really kind of get into long-term investments of this nature, which may be a little bit risky, but the returns are there, right? So I mean, I think those are the people that we want to start focusing on in the beginning, and this helps on an incremental manner. And I think the second way of really looking at it is really kind of seeing what are the levels of development that the city in itself can do, right? I mean, is it able to issue bonds by themselves, right? Then that in a way that also helps them enter into the capital markets themselves, so that in a way kind of turns them around into getting more investments coming into the cities as well. So I mean, there's multiple ways of doing it, but I think the way you basically described it in terms of really kind of subdividing it into different asset class with the built-in enabling environment on top of it, I think that's where you really kind of start mobilizing more capital into the city, into the things that we need. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sabine. I think we are now going into the final round of the last statements in terms of our presentations and how we perceive this event. So maybe, Sabine, since we still have you online, maybe what are your last statement, last remark you want to give as a kind of a conclusion of your presentation today? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you for that, Rajan. I think what I would like to say, and I guess a key takeaway from this one for all the audience would be, I mean, when you're looking at innovation, innovation is key to development. I mean, I think that no one doubts that. But I think when we're looking at innovation, we need to really unpack what's needed in the system. I mean, yes, a nice nifty piece of gadget is great, and that's the beginning. But we need to make sure that nice nifty gadget is in everybody's hands and it's doing the work that's needed and that should be done across the globe throughout the population. So that's why innovation is really needed, and innovation is needed not just on the product side, but it's also needed in the policy side. We need our policymakers to be more innovative, and then we also need our financiers to be much more innovative. I mean, as Drajan just mentioned, impact investors are risk averse, so we need them to kind of come with us to really enjoy the ride. I mean, it's a transport thing that I'm talking about, but the ride is fantastic. So let's jump on the ride with us, and then and let us actually make sure that the money does its work. And then let's have that innovation there. Yeah, that's how I'd like to end it. Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful,
everybody.
Sabine. Thank you so much for your contribution. Kabishi, same question to you. Obviously, I'm going to put you on the hotspot now.
Thank you very much, Drazen. Well, the only thing I'll say from a country perspective is that we want to really encourage the countries to increase their engagement with the GCF. Even though there is this perception, which is somewhat deserved, of the complexity of the procedures for accessing the GCF, we actually have endeavored in order to increase the ways that we can tap into the GCF and also the various areas of intervention that we can cover. 3 years ago, you would not have found this type of regional readiness programs that we have now, but today they've become much more common. A couple of years ago, you may not have found the same type of pipeline development that we do have now, or even support for project development. So we only can be limited by what our brains can generate as ideas, and as a GCF, we are ready to continue accompanying our countries and other partners in increasing their capacity to tap into climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Kabishi. Very thoughtful. Finally, my final remark, I mean, first of all, I really would like to say that I'm humbled with the experiences I'm learning from Korea in terms of smart city development and strategic focus and financing focus we are getting from Korea to further develop smart cities. Obviously, Korea is doing more than its fair share to combat the climate change. Now, that cannot be said, it cannot be said the same for the developing countries. And I think this gap between Korea and developing countries is becoming increasingly wide. In the same time, we have 20 to 30 years essentially to urgently save the climate and try to stop the destabilization of climate system. I clearly said in my presentation, while we are theoretizing on 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, the reality is that under current destabilizing influences, we can go up to 4.6. So that means that the urgent paradigm shifting and transformative action is needed in developing countries. And I think, from my perspective at least, is that we are not doing jointly enough to transfer some of the Korean know-how into developing countries. Now, we are transferring know-how into developing countries through one of the channels, certainly not the only channel, is GCF. Now, what GCF is doing is we are focusing on transformative action fields for cities, and we are offering a very highly concessional financing, and we are essentially, what we are trying to do is prioritize and de-risk a set of interventions that is going to rapidly bring the carbon emissions down and refocus city on developing resilient infrastructure and low carbon infrastructure, essentially trying to save the economic growth, but in the same time decouple it from the high carbon emission. And that in developing countries setting is sometimes very difficult to do. Think of African cities, think of Asian cities, think of Latin American cities who all have very deep problems. Think about the fact that COVID-19 has caused 38 million job losses in Latin America alone. 38 million job losses. So who is going to, in the right mind, think about the green transformation in a situation where we have a 38 million job losses? Only where we create a green transformation as economic recovery program that is going to permanently decouple cities from the fossil fuel emissions and then create jobs, for instance, in decarbonizing construction value chain or decarbonizing transportation, that such a transformation will create sufficient economic impetus that creates jobs, that creates then a confidence that the green measures are actually going to become a new paradigm. And we, do not have, 120 years to do that. We have 20 to 30 years. So that is significant. So think about how we can actually continue to transfer Korean know-how. How do we enhance the green transformation as economic recovery tool? And how do we use this opportunity to permanently displace fossil fuels with the green solutions? With that in mind, I would like to thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for wonderful presentations. Please give a big round of applause to all speakers. Thank you. Before we end this Green Climate Fund session, Professor Jun-Seok Hwang, the Director of Global R&D Center, will give us closing remarks. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Jun-Seok Hwang.
First of all, I'd like to give my great thanks to the last inspiring experts, Rajen and Tebish, and also Sabine, for your really, expertise to be shared with all our SNU community and also the partner out there, who are observing what we say about what green innovation is. I'm very moved, and I see great future of our continent and our globe, by understanding and knowing dedicated experts like you are working at GCF and also work for all our global humanity. I'd like to ask, again, for all the audience and also all the participants to give, great thanking to all our panelists again, for their inspiring work. Well, I think it's not closing remark. We are only in the 1/3 point of the day. So just only 8 hours passed out of 24 hours of the Green Innovation Day, we dedicated today. But as a 1/3 of, today's green innovation, we have been actually going through very important perspectives by many experts and also keynote speakers from various organizations, including SNU experts on the autonomous vehicle with the e-mobility, and which finally turned into the technological innovation for the green transformation by keynote speaker, Professor Kyung-Soo Lee. And you have seen, and also the World Bank, who was actually institutional representative of global economy, has been working on the innovation of utility to be used for the greenness and green development. And they're also, seeking for the innovative ideas and business model and financing mechanism to enable the innovation in the place of protecting the environment and eventually sustainability of our, global humanity. And also thirdly, who are the host and co-organizer, of today's event, GCF, Green Climate Fund, which has more than 6 and 7 years of the presence in Korea as one of the first UN headquarters organization in Korea, and has been serving for the global community in this small continent, but has a great impact so far to moving ahead and get acquaintance and also awareness of greenness from all the globe. Many people say that we are still far behind what we want to do for the climate change and recovery from what we did for our nature, and also somehow many of the situations are pessimistic. But from the point of view what we see last 10 years ago, and our awareness and our new generation are pretty much aware, equipped with the new value system. They're different. Their values are more on the survivability and sustainability and living together than competition, than economy, than the money and the capital. I think such kind of change is not possible without the dedicated leaders and experts and people and frontiers like the people from GCF. I clearly witness GCF's dedication has been serving well to our global community and reach to the many edges of our global community. This is the time that there's no developing country and developed country to be aware on this one, and we are facing the challenges of the pandemic, which have actually bloomed from the biological imbalance of the environment, which is actually outcome of our modernization and civilization. I believe we are all aware of the same problem, which is, I believe, a very good sign, because there's no reason for us to debate what the value is. At the same time, we have a community like today, GRC and GCF, and also upcoming sessions, CTCN, Climate Technology Centers and Network, IASE, International Association of Sustainable Economy, and UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program. I hope we be convinced and confident that we can overcome all these difficulties, and we already identified what the problem is, and now we are getting together to solve that problem together. Today's Green Innovation Day actually gave us very important 3 lessons for us to work together as one community of practice. First, it's a global innovation. Green innovation, what we are pursuing, requires the cooperation of the global community. The environmental issues cannot be solved and resolved regionally only, by nation, no, but by the commonness of the green. And also, it's not only about the money. The innovation, what we are saying in the global innovation about the society and value system, and also the way we are living. I believe we already started the steps to promote that global innovation. The second one, I'd like to say, the second message that today's one gave us, open innovation. Green innovation is about the openness and open innovation. It's about how you can build the relationship, and also you can be a one community and being together. And openness actually gives more freedom for us to give and get, and for us to express more each other. That's another one. I'm convinced our openness has been expanded by today's effort. I believe this openness will be opened to both on-site and online, and also will open the door of all the partners we will have in the following years and also in the following sessions. Finally, the one I'd like to say as a green innovation is human innovation. We are talking about all these great virtues of the survivability and sustainability for the benefit of the great global humanity. And the value we are chasing for this humanity has been advanced by our governing logics and values of greenness. Our understanding about the greenness has been much more much more advanced than we have in the period of Aristotle, where science started. Our philosophy has been actually expanded more, and our intelligence, which is the symbol of humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens, has been expanded by our creative idea what the green is. I truly witness that today's Green Innovation Day gave us this very third important lessons that what we say human innovation. I really thank you all and all our partners and speakers to give such a great lessons to me and to all my students and to all my friends and partners. Let's expand and develop and improve our understanding further. I greatly thank you again. I hope to see you again in the following sessions with our other partners. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you for inspiring remarks. Please give a big round of applause to Professor Jun Seok Hwan.